Chapter 280. The first step in a corner of East Borough. A drunken Xian faced the wall, pulled off his pants, and began watering the moss in comfort. When he was done, someone suddenly patted his shoulder. Xian couldn't help but shiver a few times. He picked up his pants and half turned to see a short boy in a canvas jacket and cap. The boy raised his head, revealing a mild and delicate face despite looking dirty. "Zio, why are you dressed like that?" Xian blurted out in surprise. Zio put her index finger to her lips to indicate the need for silence. Then she suppressed her voice and said, "I'll ask and you answer. Keep your voice down." Astonished by her awe-inspiring presence, Xian could only nod. Which of the guys that Williams knew have died within the past 2 days? Zio asked in a low voice. Xian used his alcohol-paralyzed brain to carefully think for a while and said, "Gavin. Gavin was found to have drowned in the Tussock River this morning. He probably fell into the river last night. The poor sod doesn't know how to swim, and likes to enjoy the wind by the river when he's drunk." Zio's gaze suddenly became sharp. Without any hesitation, she asked, "Did Gavin accept Williams's request to look for the wanted criminal Lenevis?" "Of course, we all got this commission from Williams. Anyway, it's not like it's a big deal. All we have to do is show the portrait to everyone we know, and keep an eye out for someone who looks like him. Oh, Williams, he said that if there's a clue, he'll treat me to 3 days of booze and meat. The poor fellow actually died in a gas explosion. That's why I refused to have my landlord install a gas pipe. That was months ago. I can only afford a cheap motel now," Jean droned on. "What region is Gavin in charge of? Did he mention anything to you?" Zio looked sideways, pursed her lips, and stared straight at Xian. He usually goes to the dock area near the East Balham dock. He even met me yesterday evening, and said that he went to the Workers' Alliance tavern there, to spread the news of his search for Lenevis. And he also showed the portrait of Lenevis to everyone present." Jean hiccuped. There were many docks in Backland, most of which were considered as the dock area and designated as shipyards. "And after that, did Gavin say what he was going to do?" Zio asked again, frowning doubtfully. "Of course, drinking. He planned to have a good drink, and then find a place to sleep. Oh, the poor sod must have felt hot from drinking, and wanted to take a bath in the river. But he forgot he couldn't swim, and it's almost winter." Xian sighed again. Gavin didn't discover anything. He had gone to the Workers' Alliance tavern in East Balham dock and distributed leaflets to search for Lenevis, but ended up meeting his demise. It even implicated Williams. The murderer's reaction can no longer be described as extreme anymore. "He's simply a lunatic. If I were Lenevis, the easiest option would be to immediately move somewhere else and avoid being found. Unless he's embroiled in something and cannot leave anytime soon. But I wasn't the only one looking for him. There are also many bounty hunters. He may kill Williams, but can he kill that many people? If he had the ability, he would kill off everyone who spread wanted posters in Civilau's yard." Zio was completely befuddled by the entire matter, just like how she found Williams's death was impossible. In the end, she decided to report the problem to Miss Audrey first, and then head to the Workers' Alliance tavern in East Balham in disguise. She wouldn't make any inquiries, and only observe to see if there was anyone suspicious. Sherwood Borough. Rice Police Station. Once again, Klein found himself huddled on a backrest-equipped bench with thieves and drunkards. How unlucky. To think that I would run into the police and fail to take a detour in time. It's all because of that damn serial killer. As Klein cursed that particular person, he thought about how to hide his charms, and the herbal powder he couldn't explain away, and dodged the body search that followed. He had tried to put them in his black gloves, then find a chance to slip them into a hidden spot in the police station, only to retrieve them when he left. Just then, his eyes lit up and he saw the young lawyer, Jürgen Cooper, with his hair neatly combed back. He was dressed like he was attending a banquet. Just as Cooper came over, he was accompanied by a police constable. "You can leave after signing your name," Jürgen said with his usual serious expression. "Is that all?" Klein asked in surprise. Jürgen nodded slightly. "Yes, they know you're a well-known detective." "What kind of reason is this?" Klein didn't dare to ask further. He immediately got up and followed after Jürgen, who was wearing a long black tweed coat. He signed his name at a leisurely pace before leaving. The weather was different from the last time. He was led out from the police station by Jürgen. There was no rain, and only thick clouds obscuring the crimson moon and stars. The streets were illuminated by gas lamps that lined both sides of the streets. "Thank you so much. I've troubled you once again." Klein briskly walked forward and came to Jürgen's side. Jürgen turned his head to look at him and said to him without a smile, "There's no need to thank me. This is my job. £2. Klein sized him up seriously and revealed a smile. Okay. His wallet was bulging recently, and he produced 2 one-pound notes at once. Without a trace of politeness, Jürgen received the payment and said, "If you're willing to enter into a formal partnership, then every time you come to the police station, I'll only charge you £1. Of course, not for the cases that are serious. You have to understand that a large portion of the fees I charge will go to the office. It's as if I would frequently be invited to the police station for some coffee in the future. Pooey, they don't even give coffee. There's isn't even a cup of water." Before Klein could answer, he heard Jürgen add, "For a private detective, getting in and out of the police station is something that happens every once in a while. It's an occupational hazard. Well, I know very well that every private detective has a problem with the illegal bearing of arms and the illegal trespassing in other people's homes. Your response this time was very good. The police couldn't find enough evidence to prove that you were bearing a gun illegally, and the explanation for the gunpowder reaction on your body was quite sufficient. The name Quelag Club was enough to convince them. Otherwise, you most likely would have had to go to the magistrate's court. So, you're not a suspect but a good citizen. A good citizen who picked up a gun and handed it in. So there was no need for a body search. All right, but I lost a revolver and the corresponding bullets. That's several pounds, and there's also the lawyer's fee." Klein squeezed out a smile. "I understand. Lawyer Jürgen, let's establish a formal partnership." The corner of Jürgen's mouth twitched. With an extremely professional smile, he extended his hand and said, "I hope for a pleasant partnership. I sincerely hope that I don't have to see you too often at the police station." "That's not something that's up to me to decide." Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. Back at 15 Minsk Street, Klein eased himself with a hot bath. But at that moment, he once again heard illusory prayers coming from a woman. "Miss Justice, is there a clue regarding Lenivis?" Klein suddenly jumped out of the bathtub, quickly dried his body, put on his clothes, and went above the gray fog. Staring at the constantly expanding and shrinking crimson star, he extended his spirituality and chose to listen. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Honorable Mr. Fool, there's been a problem with the investigation of Lenivis." Justice, who was wearing a white gown for an unknown reason, recounted the explosion that happened on Daravi Street in East Borough, as well as Gavin's drowning. As a telepathist, who had already gained some mastery, she didn't add her own guesses, lest it affect the judgment of Mr. Fool. After listening carefully, Klein frowned, feeling that the killer's reaction was unimaginably extreme. Unlike Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, Lenivis, as a swindler, would immediately move if he discovered anything was amiss. That should be his professional instinct. There's no reason to follow the clues in reverse and kill those who are seeking him. According to this standard, 80% of East Borough's bounty hunters would die. This would cause a sensation and cause the case to be taken over by the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind. Has the benefits Lenivis gained, from the ritual of praying to the true creator to send his son down, left him mad? This is very consistent with the style of the true creator. However, the problem lies with the fact that it would be difficult for a lunatic to hide himself. Apart from the potential, Klein fell into deep thought and was in no hurry to respond to Miss Justice. He had read the newspapers and known about the explosion, so he used dream divination to recall the details. Then he wrote a new divination statement. Clues to the explosion in Daravi Street. As he recited it silently, he leaned back in his chair and entered a dream. He saw a 3-story grayish-blue apartment. On the 3rd floor of the apartment, a room had lost its windows and half the wall had been destroyed. It was filled with signs of an explosion. The scene quickly shattered. Klein woke up from his reverie as he tapped the edge of the table and thought to himself, "The clues are at the scene of the crime?" This revelation can also mean that the murderer is still watching the crime scene and wants to finish off the person who comes to investigate the matter. Yes, this will give him a chance to find the person who recently issued the bounty for Lenivus. I'll visit the crime scene in disguise and see if I can find the killer. Even if he isn't Lenivus, he must surely be connected to Lenivus. But he must have hidden himself very well. How can I find him without attracting his attention? A thought flashed as Klein's eyes was cast onto the all-black eye on the long bronze table. This was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by the Nimblewright master Rosago. In the real world, I can't use this item to manipulate those strange threads because of the residual mental corruption from the true creator. There will be irreversible harm after interacting with it for a certain amount of time. However, if it was used temporarily, I can use the threads to find a hidden person. That's something acceptable. It's just like how I used it to determine if Miss Bodyguard had left previously. Klein narrowed his eyes, removed his spirit pendulum, and divined if his trip would be dangerous. The answer was positive, but the amplitude and frequency of the spinning weren't excessive. That's acceptable. Klein was silent for a few seconds before returning to the real world. Then, by summoning himself, he placed the all-black eye into an iron cigarette case and brought it back to his bedroom. After changing his clothes, sticking his beard on, and getting ready, Klein came before the mirror and examined himself. The faint scholarly vibe that he had was completely concealed by the beard on his face, and his brown eyes seemed to be like an ancient pool which hid and sealed something within. Compared to when he was in Tingen City, Klein almost didn't recognize himself. One by one, he stretched out his fingers and clenched them into a fist. Looking at the mirror, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Captain, this is the first step to avenging both you and me." Before he finished his sentence, he saw himself grinning in the mirror, a brilliant smile on his face. Chapter 281. Clue in the suburbs west of Northborough, in a soon-to-be abandoned three-story house. It originally belonged to the Backlund Medical School, but the latter's main campus had now moved to a better and more suitable location, leaving behind only a small number of teaching staff and students who were left guarding the area after failing to graduate. Audrey was wearing a white gown and white mask. Her smooth blonde hair was also coiled up and stuffed under a cool-colored surgical cap. She darted her eyes to the side and looked at Furs Wall, who was dressed in the same way. She always felt that Furs had a special temperament that seemed to make her more suited to such attires than herself. It's the kind of temperament that allows her to pick up a scalpel and cut open a patient's stomach at any moment. Audrey didn't say anything. She followed half a step behind Furs as they entered the classroom in front of them. She was startled by the information she had received from Furs, because Mr. Fool had said it was a simple task. Considering that the simplicity of said task might be from Mr. Fool's point of view, Audrey took advantage of the moment when she was alone, changing into a disguise, to recite his honorable name and silently pray, so as to report everything that had exactly happened. However, she had yet to receive a response. After passing through the door and entering a room, Audrey instinctively looked around and found that this wasn't an ordinary classroom. There were actually 4 skeletal specimens and 4 coffins made of glass. The coffins were filled with pale naked corpses that were soaked in preserving agents. At the very top of the classroom, there was a transparent glass pillar that was also filled with a liquid. Floating inside was a male corpse that wore a black scholarly robe. The corpse's clothes stuck tightly to its body, giving off an extremely heavy feeling. He didn't relax and simply floated upright in the middle. It's as if he had died by drowning instead of being placed in there after his death. Audrey made a preliminary judgment based on her attitude as a spectator. In addition, she saw a number of men in white coats, white masks, and surgical caps sitting around the long tables in the room. None of them said a word, just like the bodies and bones around them. Looking out at the crimson moon, which had finally peeked out of the gloomy darkness, Audrey turned her head back to look at the scene inside the classroom. For a moment, she couldn't help but shudder as this place instilled an instinctive fear. But at the same time, she felt excited and agitated. This is what the life of a beyonder should be, Audrey silently muttered to herself as she followed Furs to a corner before sitting down. After waiting for a while, the floating black-clothed male corpse, inside the upright glass pillar at the front of the classroom, suddenly opened his eyes. His voice transmitted through the layers of obstructions. Let's begin. East Borough Dharavi Street. In his dusty grayish-blue worker uniform and cap, he walked along the dark streets that only had a few gas lamps that were still working. There was candlelight shining down from the various apartments on both sides of the street. This was combined with the crimson moonlight that passed through the clouds with great difficulty, and they barely outlined the silhouettes of the pedestrians. Klein encountered people with old, tattered clothes, their faces numb with despair. They were the homeless who had been chased away by the police. They had no place to sleep, so they wandered aimlessly through the streets. Occasionally, they would find some inconspicuous corner or park bench to rest at for a while, but they were soon chased away again. In the cold and dark night, Klein felt that they were more like zombies than the zombies he had seen, and the entire East Borough was more like an abyss than the legendary abyss. He hurriedly took a quick breath which hurt his throat, causing him to cough involuntarily. He quickly gathered his thoughts and looked through the corner of his eyes at the apartment on the corner of the street. It had obviously suffered from an explosion and hadn't been repaired yet. The best place to monitor the crime scene is the apartment across the street. The third and fourth story and the roof all meet these requirements. Klein analyzed the situation with the knowledge he had learned as a nighthawk. Throughout the whole process, he didn't slow down his pace to avoid arousing suspicion. At the end of the street, Klein smoothly crossed the apartment building numbered 1 and entered the building across the street from the crime scene. The one-bedroom apartment he had rented in East Borough was similar to this apartment, and he had also lived in an apartment of slightly higher class with his brother Benson and sister Melissa in Tinjin City for quite a long time. It was Klein's personal experience, but it also came from the memory fragments of the original Klein. As his thoughts raced, Klein lowered his cap, lowered his head, and without rushing, he walked up the creaking stairs to the third floor. Due to his unlucky encounter in the evening, he no longer had a revolver, so all he could do was stick one hand into his pocket and hold a few tarot cards in between his fingers. There was no light other than the faint moonlight in the corridor of the third floor. Klein was in no hurry to move forward, so he carefully observed the layout. The spot directly across the crime scene is on the left. The one with the best view for surveillance should be the third room from here. Klein began to walk slowly and carefully. After walking past 2 rooms, he also inserted his right hand into his pocket and gently opened the iron cigarette case. After a split second, his fingers touched the all-black eye, and the murmurs resounded in his ears as they attempted to tear his mind apart. At the same time, with the help of this corrupted item, Klein saw many strange black lines. These thin lines floated in the air, and although they were intertwined and entangled a little, he could still distinguish who they belonged to if he traced them back to the source. The corresponding figures were reflected in Klein's soon-to-be-cooked brain. There were men, women, and children sleeping in the bunk beds, and several tenants lying in bed on the floor. Other than that, there were no other special spots, nor were there any hidden figures. The illusion in front of him, and the auditory hallucination in his ears slowly improved as Klein quickly retracted his hand from the all-black eye. He endured the pain as he continued to move forward. Once he felt some relief, he would immediately observe the other room. Unfortunately, his efforts of searching the entire apartment to see if there were any places that allowed the observation of the crime scene was in vain. Phew. Klein cowered in a corner of a balcony. His hands were on his knees as he panted heavily. Tears streamed from the corners of his eyes, and from time to time, his nose would run as if he had fallen sick. This was the result of his repeated contact with the all-black eye within a short period of time. Even with Klein's resistance in this area, he wasn't completely immune to it. The only thing that satisfied him was that it only agitated him and didn't corrupt him. Otherwise, he would have given up long ago and wouldn't have dared to try again. That would have led directly to devolving into madness. After resting for a while, Klein finally calmed down and switched to a different apartment that didn't have the same view as this one. But it was still for naught. Did I interpret it wrong? The clues are at the scene of the crime? When Klein returned to the street, he looked suspiciously out of the corner of his eye at the apartment with traces of an explosion. With the mindset of just giving it a try, he put his hand back into his pocket, pushed the metal cigarette case open, and stuck his hand inside. He wanted to see if anyone was hiding in the apartment where the crime scene was located. With a hum, Klein's head suddenly felt like it was being smashed as his body wobbled a little. Like a drunkard, he staggered forward and looked at the apartment which had signs of an explosion. As he was too far away, he couldn't clearly see the black lines, nor could he trace the source of the black lines. He could only barely distinguish where the black lines had gathered, and this indicated that there was someone present. No. Klein quickly swept the area and made a rough judgment. Suddenly, he noticed a black line floating out from the crime scene on the third floor which merged into the air. Klein's pupil shrank, and he made a confirmation before quickly withdrawing his hands, so as to stop being in contact with the all-black eye. There's someone in the destroyed room. That murderer is actually crazy enough to wait for investigators to come to the crime scene? Isn't he afraid that official Beyonders will take over the case? I made a wrong judgment and failed to find him, because I shared a different sense of logic from that of a lunatic. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he slowly exhaled and pretended that nothing had happened whilst he walked in a circle until he reached the entrance of the apartment building. By then, all the negative effects he had suffered from the all-black eye had been quelled. Controlling his facial expression and body language, Klein headed up to the third floor, as if he were going home, his footsteps quick and heavy with fatigue. In the darkness of the corridor, he caught sight of the doorless room, which had half its walls collapsed. Then he casually headed for the public bathroom. As he neared the room, his hand, which had been in his pocket, touched the all-black eye. Again, the mind-wrecking murmurs and the blurred hallucinations assaulted him. Through the corners of his eyes, Klein saw a black, illusory thread spread out from the crime scene. As he traced the source, he found a man who had completely merged into the shadows. His aura was the same color. The man was extremely tall, almost 2 meters in height. The corners of his mouth drooped slightly, making him appear rather eccentric. His cold eyes were like those of a wild beast's, possessing a ferocity that couldn't be hidden. It's not Lenivis. Klein withdrew his fingers, relaxed his body, and avoided the likelihood of staring. He entered the public bathroom at the end of the corridor without stopping. Nor did he alarm the man. The public bathroom and the crime scene weren't on the same side. He wiped off his cold sweat, and after quelling the negative effects, he directly jumped out the window, climbing down skillfully before leaving with brisk steps. He didn't stay a moment longer. He knew that in a few minutes the man would be alerted to the absence of someone who had gone to the bathroom, so he had to get as far away from the street as possible. It wasn't that Klein didn't want to walk back the way he came from, but if he didn't know which room he could go to, it would similarly expose him. The clown quickly ran and circled around a huge area before entering that one-bedroom apartment he had rented in East Borough. He then went above the gray fog to confirm that there was no danger of him being caught. That fellow must have had some sort of deep connection with Lenivis. After a moment's thought, Klein conjured a portrait of the man from earlier, sending his thoughts to the crimson star that represented Miss Justice. Soon after, he said solemnly in a tone of authority, "This is a clue." Chapter 282. This is East Borough inside the soon-to-be abandoned medical school building. Audrey suddenly felt adrift as she took a detour to leave the gathering which had just ended. She saw the familiar thick gray fog and the blurry figure situated in the center high above. "This is a clue." Accompanying Mr. Fool's solemn voice were scenes that looked like a film reel, a colored one at that. A man who wasn't particularly muscular, but was nearly 2 meters tall in height, was wearing a black priest robe and standing in the shadows. His light yellow hair was slightly curled, and his dark brown eyes were cold with malice. The corners of his mouth drooped slightly, making him look like a ferocious wolf. A clue? A clue to the bombing on East Borough's Dharavi Street and Gavin's drowning? Is this the murderer? Audrey stared blankly for a moment before immediately coming to an understanding. Mr. Fool already has a clue. He's really impressive. No, he's omnipotent. After sighing to herself, she turned to look at Furs. As soon as Furs removed her mask and surgical cap and got into the carriage, she noticed Miss Audrey's slightly strange gaze. She immediately asked in puzzlement, "Is there something on my face?" "Nope." Audrey looked away and sat down before removing her disguise. Furs recalled the gathering and asked curiously, "Miss Audrey, why didn't you announce that you were purchasing the Spectator formula? You could have established contact with the psychology alchemists that way." She remembered that the generous Miss Audrey had remained silent most of the time, and only sold some spirituality-infused materials, and responded to buying other varieties accordingly. Audrey smiled faintly and said, "This is my first gathering in this circle. I think it's more important to observe and wait. I'm looking forward to the potion formula, and even more so, the mystical items, but I told myself that there's no rush. It would be a better strategy to familiarize myself before taking action. This is also a professional habit of the spectator pathway. Moreover, there were no beyonder ingredients like dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid, or spring of the elves marrow crystals, which Mr. World wishes to obtain." Audrey silently added, looking at the girl who wasn't 18 yet. Furs suddenly felt that she was more mature than ever before. She suddenly laughed at herself and said, "If I had been like you back then, I wouldn't have wasted such a precious opportunity." Audrey gave a reserved smile as a response before saying, "I'll ask some special friends in the morning if they have any leads on the Dharavi Street bombing. Wait for the information at the same place with Zayo." "All right." Furs nodded without any doubts. Instead of returning to Minsk Street, Klein slept in the one-bedroom apartment in East Borough's Black Palm Street. He was afraid that the suspected murderer in the black priest robe had accomplices who could be searching the streets for him, although the probability of meeting him wasn't high, and he had disguised himself ahead of time, so that it was unlikely he could be recognized. His divination indicated that there was a possibility. To be cautious, Klein made do and decided to spend the night at East Borough. At dawn, he changed into another dark blue worker's uniform, put on a light brown cap, and left the room. He went down the stairs and into the street. At that moment, the white fog with a yellowish tint shrouded the surroundings. There were blurry figures of people passing by, and the cold morning air was soaking into their clothes. Klein lowered his head and hurried along, just like the people around him who had gotten up early for work. While walking, he saw a man in his 40s or 50s ahead of him. He wore a thick jacket and had gray hair around his temples. He was pacing in place and fumbling for a cigarette while shivering. Finally, he took out a box of empty matches in his clothes' inner pocket. Just as he opened the matchbox, his right hand quivered, and the crumpled cigarette fell to the ground and rolled in front of Klein. Klein stopped, picked it up, and handed it to him. Thank you. I can't live without this old friend. There's only a few left." The man thanked him sincerely and accepted the cigarette. His face was pale, and he appeared to not have shaved for quite a while. Exhaustion was expressed without reserve from the corner of his eyes as he lamented, "I haven't slept for another night. I don't know how long I can last. I hope the Lord will bless me so that I can enter the workhouse today." "He's a homeless person who has been chased away," Klein casually asked. "Why doesn't the king and ministers allow all of you to sleep in the park?" "Who knows? But to sleep in this kind of weather outside, it's very likely that you'll never wake up again. It's still better in the day, since you can find a warmer place. Sigh. But this will make us lack the time or strength to look for jobs." The man lit a cigarette and sucked at it delightfully, as though he had some of his strength restored, and he walked beside Klein. It was uncertain if his destination was at the end of the fog, or somewhere deep into the fog. Klein had no intention of exchanging pleasantries, and was about to speed away from him when he saw the man, who had spoken clearly, bend down and pick up a dark object from the ground. It looked like an apple core that had been nibbled clean. The man swallowed his saliva before stuffing the dirt-covered fruit core into his mouth. He chewed it until it was mashed up before swallowing it down with great familiarity. Nothing was left. Looking at Klein's surprised eyes, he wiped his mouth, shrugged his shoulders, and smiled bitterly. I haven't eaten in almost 3 days. This sentence struck Klein's heart, causing him to feel indescribably moved. He silently sighed and said with a smile, "Sorry, I didn't introduce myself just now. I'm a reporter, and I'm currently writing about homeless people. Can I interview you? Let's go to the cafe up front." The man froze for a moment before he smiled and said, "No problem. It's much warmer inside than on the streets. If you can stay a little bit longer after the interview, and let me sleep inside for half an hour. No, 15 minutes. That would be even better." Klein turned agape, momentarily at a loss for words. He just silently led his interviewee into the budget cafe at the end of the street. The tables and chairs in the coffee shop were quite greasy. Due to the walls and windows inside, there were quite a few guests. The average temperature was indeed much higher than the streets. The man scratched his throat, concealing his Adam's apple that was squirming from the fragrance. Klein motioned for him to sit down, and went to order 2 large cups of tea, a plate of lamb stewed with young peas, 2 loaves of bread, 2 pieces of toast, a serving of low-quality butter, and a serving of artificial cream for a total of 17.5 pence. "Have some food to eat. We'll have the interview after you eat your fill." Once the food was ready, Klein carried them back to their table. "This is for me?" the man asked with anticipation and surprise. "Except for a piece of toast and a cup of tea, the rest is yours." Klein smiled in response. The man wiped his eyes and said with a slightly choked voice, "Why, you truly are a kind-hearted person." "After starving for so long, make sure not to eat too quickly," Klein warned. "I know, I had an old buddy who died just like that." The middle-aged man worked hard at eating at a slower pace, occasionally lifting his cup of tea and gulping it down. Klein easily finished the toast and watched quietly, waiting for the man to finish his meal. "Phew, I haven't eaten until I was this full in 3 months, no, half a year. In the workhouse, the food they give is just enough." After a while, the man put down his spoon, leaving empty plates in front of him. Pretending to be a journalist, Klein asked casually, "How did you become a vagabond?" "It was bad luck. I was originally a worker leading quite a good life. I had a wife, 2 cute children, a boy and a girl. But a few years ago, an infectious disease took them away. And I also stayed in the hospital for a long period of time, losing my job, my wealth, and my family in the process. From then on, I often couldn't find a job, and I didn't have any money to rent a house or buy food. All I could do was wander on the different streets and in certain parks. This made me very weak, making it harder for me to find a job." The man spoke with a hint of nostalgia and sadness in his numbness. He took a sip of his tea, sighed and spoke again. "I can only wait for an opportunity to enter the workhouse. But as you know, every workhouse only takes in a limited number of people. With good luck, and if I queue up in time, I can spend a few days in peace, recover my strength a little, and then find a temporary job. Yeah, temporary. Soon, I'll be jobless again, and the previous process will be repeated. I have no idea how much longer I can last like that. I should have been a good worker." Klein thought for a moment and asked, "How many cigarettes do you have left?" "Not many left." The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "This is the last of my assets. The only thing I have left after I was chased out by the landlord. Heh, one can't bring them into the workhouses, but I'll secretly hide them in the seams of my clothes. I'll only take one out to smoke during my worst hardships, so that I can have some hope. I don't know how long I can last, but let me tell you, I was a good worker back then." Klein wasn't a professional journalist, and was momentarily at a loss on what to ask. He turned his head to look out the window, and saw faces with obvious hunger plastered across them. Some of them were relatively sober, and they belonged to the residents of East Borough. Some of them wore looks of numbness and exhaustion, nothing like that of humans. They were vagabonds. There is no obvious gap between the two. The former can easily become the latter. For example, the gentleman in front of me. When Klein looked back, he discovered that the man had fallen asleep, his body curled up on a chair. After a few minutes of silence, Klein went to pat the man awake, and gave him a handful of copper pennies. "This is the payment for the interview." Okay, thank you. The man didn't realize what was happening, and when Klein reached the door, he raised his voice and said, "I'll go to a budget motel and get a bath, get a good night's sleep, and then get a job." At noon, Klein attended a party at the Sammers. There were 10 guests. There was apple juice with steak, roast chicken, fried fish, sausage, cream soup, lots of delicacies, 2 bottles of champagne, and a bottle of red wine. On his way back from the bathroom, he met Mrs. Stellan Sammer. He thanked her sincerely. It was a sumptuous lunch. Truly delightful. Thank you for your hospitality. It cost a total of £4 and 8 soldi. The most expensive were the 3 bottles of wine, but they were all part of Luke's collection. He has a liquor cabinet. The pretty Mrs. Stellan smiled in response. Without waiting for Klein to speak, she said, "You earned £10 from Mary's matter alone. And if you can keep up the good fortune, you'll soon be able to have a banquet like this. For people of our class, you have to invite friends once a month, and also be invited by friends." Klein, who was already used to her mannerisms, obliged politely. "Well, I'll have to wait till my income settles at £400 a year, before I can be like you." Stellan immediately raised her chin slightly, and tried hard to make her smile faint. £430, it must be £430. Dock area, East Balham Dock, Workers' Alliance Tavern. Zio wore boots that gave her height a huge boost, and stuck on a thick beard, making herself look like a short man. She tried to recall the portrait from Miss Audrey, trying to engrave in her mind the image of the man who might have been the murderer. If Gavin had been killed by him, the murderer probably frequents this tavern. Zio ordered a glass of rye beer and a lunch set before huddling in a corner and eating slowly. From time to time, she would look around furtively in search of her target. After a while, the tavern's door was pushed open again, and Zio reflexively looked over. With just one look, her pupils shrank so thin that they resembled needles, as she nearly became petrified. The patron who entered was nearly 2 meters tall. Chapter 283. Doc Union. Zio has been in the bounty hunter business for a very long time. Many things were done on instinct without any thought. When she saw the patron who entered was nearly 2 meters tall, she instinctively lowered her head and continued to eat her pork sausage and French fries as if nothing had happened. Although the food entered her mouth, Zio didn't taste it at all. She endured dozens of painful seconds before she slowly raised her head and pretended to look around casually. Soon, she saw that the patron who had just entered was sitting in front of the bar counter, waiting for his booze and lunch. Soft, curly, pale yellow hair, dark brown beast-like eyes, a slightly drooping mouth, an aura of solitude and malevolence. Little by little, the details came into Zio's eyes, overlapping with the image in her head. It's him. It's the suspected murderer. The man who killed Williams. Zio lowered her head again, and slowly stuffed the rest of the food into her mouth. After a few minutes, she set the tray down on the bar, along with the glass, and left the Workers' Alliance Tavern without looking back. Due to her high boots, they effectively masked the most obvious features of her boots. Outside, Zio slowed her pace, and found a secluded spot to observe the people entering and exiting the tavern. After waiting for a while, she finally found an acquaintance, a technician named Burton, who lived in East Borough and worked at the East Balham Dock. The young man liked to treat himself to a cup of shoddy rye beer at noon or in the afternoon, and his salary only allowed him to afford such a beer, and he couldn't drink it every day. Zio nimbly darted over and patted Burton on the shoulder. She lowered her voice and said, "It's me, Zio." "Zio." Burton looked up and down at the short man, and nearly failed to recognize him as the famous arbiter Zio Dericha of the streets of East Borough. "I have something to ask you." Zio pointed to a nearby corner. Burton followed in puzzlement, only to come to a realization when he arrived in a secluded corner. "Are you doing a bounty mission?" He had heard that Zio was also a bounty hunter. "Yes." Zio nodded perfunctorily, fished out 5 pennies and tossed them around. "Do you know that tall man at the tavern?" "You mean the one that's this tall, has pale yellow hair, and wears a fierce look?" Burton gestured. "Yes." Zio took out the folded portrait and unfolded it. "You have to be sure. That's him. He's been coming to this tavern often for the past 2 to 3 months. I've never seen him before that. He's very fierce, completely unreasonable. And he's good at fighting. It's best that you don't provoke him. Burton glanced at the portrait carefully and gave some sincere advice. Yeah, when I saw that person just now, it was just like my encounter with a ferocious beast when I was young. I felt that I was in danger and wasn't a match for him, so I had to immediately avoid him. Zio secretly exhaled and asked, "Do you know anyone he's in close contact with?" "No idea. He's not very sociable and he seldom speaks. We don't even know what his name is. We have given him a nickname, Giant." Burton curled his lips and shook his head. Zio thought for a while before asking again, "Where else have you met him, besides the tavern?" "You can ask your friends the same question. Remember, it has to be a trusted friend." Burton recalled and said, "When I went to the dock union to do some work, the East Balham Docks Dock Union, I would occasionally see him appear there." "Zio, why aren't you a member of the union? You're so just, and those guys not only charge us 1.5 solely a week, but when the other docks go on strike, they'll pay us half our salary, just because we have to support our families. Lord, let's just forget about it. In order to live a good life, we must help each other. However, once they organize a strike, they'll come to an agreement with the lawyers sent by those rich people. Our situation doesn't improve at all." Stop. Zio lowered her right palm and said, "Apart from that, have you seen Giant anywhere else?" "No, my friends probably haven't either. After all, we often discuss him in private," Burton answered in a firm tone. Zio didn't say anything more and gave him 5 copper pennies. "Drinks on me. Don't tell anyone about what I just asked. It'll be very dangerous." Before she finished her sentence, she had already turned around the corner and headed towards the dock union located at East Balham Dock. About 10 minutes later, Zio saw the 2-story yellow building. She wore her canvas coat inverted and exposed the patches beneath, instantly transforming herself from a short worker to a vagabond. Zio looked at the homeless people huddled around the corner, pinched her nose, and went over to sit down beside them. She glanced at the dock union on the opposite side of the street, where people were coming in and out. As the minutes passed, Zio endured the cold and the harsh environment while tenaciously observing the situation around the dock union and the surrounding area. She clearly remembered Williams's insistence on drinking, and she also remembered how she felt when she saw the newspaper that fateful day. These feelings made her even more patient than usual. At that moment, about 8 people came out of the dock union, and they headed for the cafe across the street to have lunch in groups. Zio narrowed her eyes and carefully scanned every passerby to confirm their appearance. "There's no one suspicious." Zio was about to look away and wait for the next batch of people, when the door to the coffee shop creaked and was pulled open as the heat from within rushed out. A man couldn't help but take off his gold-rimmed glasses and wipe away the fog with his sleeves. Zio gave him a casual glance and her gaze suddenly froze. Those eyes, that mouth, it always had that taunting smile. "Lenevis?" Zio jerked her head back, not daring to look again. The man from before had bronze skin and short hair, and his face was craggy. He was very different from the portraits, except that his eyes and mouth gave her a familiar feeling. It was the feeling of taunting everyone. "Is it Lenevis? Can it be Lenevis?" Zio bowed her head and stared at the flagstones on the street. At the Sammers, after a sumptuous lunch, the hosts and guests gathered in the activity room to chat, and they agreed to play Texas together. Interesting rumors and humorous stories echoed intermittently as Klein maintained his smile, interjecting from time to time. He also saw the Sammer family's 2 children entering and exiting energetically. And next to him, Jürgen Cooper wore his usual serious expression, occasionally providing legal advice for the discussion. Klein smiled, turned his body slightly, and asked in a low voice, "Are you bored?" "No, their topics are very interesting." Jürgen nodded seriously. Klein was stunned and blurted a question. "Then why don't you laugh?" Jürgen frowned slightly and looked at him in puzzlement. "Why are you smiling?" Klein's mouth twitched, not knowing how to respond. He was about to make a joke about how much Jürgen was like his cat Brody, forever so serious, when suddenly he heard a series of ethereal pleas. "Female." Miss Justice has found useful information, so quickly, based on the clue I gave her? Klein stood up and slightly bowed. I need to use the bathroom. In the bathroom, Klein locked the door, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. His judgment was very accurate. As the plea came from Miss Justice, Klein suddenly felt nervous as he emanated his spirituality in anticipation and seriousness to listen to her words. After the usual honorable name, Justice recounted truthfully. They discovered the clue you provided at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in the Pier District's East Balham dock. The person's nickname is Giant. After tailing the Giant and figuring his in and outs, they discovered a person suspected to be Lenevis at the East Balham docks dock union. Temporarily, they don't dare to approach Lenevis because Giant is very powerful and dangerous. They can only continue waiting for an opportunity. In the meantime, they've also asked if they could notify the police and collect the bounty after confirming that it's Lenevis. Lenevis has a very powerful and dangerous helper. Does he have any other helpers? Is there a faction backing him? Why did he kill so many people? What was he planning to do by being in the dock union? A series of questions flashed through Klein's mind, making him feel that things were much more complicated than he had expected. As for the last request, his answer was undoubtedly yes. He would even suggest to the other party that they should inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess directly, because there was a possibility of the police leaking the information. Getting the Nighthawks of the Church of the Goddess to kill Lenevis is also a form of revenge. Klein silently murmured to himself. He had a strong urge to immediately confirm that the man was Lenevis, lest things changed because he waited too long. He took a deep breath, suppressed his emotions, and undid the spirit pendulum around his wrist on his sleeve. There is danger going to the dock union for confirmation. Closing his eyes and chanting 7 times, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the topaz pendant. He discovered that it was motionless, completely still. The divination failed. Klein immediately frowned. He changed the sentence he used, changed the divination method, but they all resulted in a failure. After some careful thought, he thought of 3 reasons. First, there wasn't enough information to make a divination. Second, Lenevis wasn't at the dock union, making it difficult for the divination to succeed. And third, Lenevis was just like Nsangwil, who had items that could shield against divination. An item to shield against divination, a benefit he obtained from that god spawn ritual? A little godhood of the true creator? Klein thought for a few seconds, then decided that no matter what, he had to make a trip to the dock union. There were certain things that needed to be done even though danger was a certainty. If the 2 ladies were able to observe secretly without being seen, so can I. I only need to meet with Lenevis once, and I can confirm it with divination. Of course, I can't be rash. I have to prepare in advance. For example, I have to send the all-black eye above the gray fog, and not carry it with me. That's to prevent the spiritual corruption of the true creator from resonating with his godhood. Another example, I should elevate my height, so that the Giant wouldn't be able to recognize me as the passerby from last night from my figure. For example, I should find a suitable and sufficient reason to not arouse suspicion. Yes, I can pretend to be a reporter and head there for an interview. I'll visit Mike Joseph later and borrow his false reporter identification. The corner of Klein's mouth slowly curled up as he blanketed his body with his spirituality before descending back into the real world. Chapter 284. Instinctive trembling 3 in the afternoon at the dock union in East Balham Dock. Klein wore a thick sweater, a tan jacket, and a simple cap that brought him closer to the usual investigative reporters in style, rather than the ones who attended banquets and interviewed people of status from time to time. Such a costume had cost him an extra £1.10 solely. At that moment, he was wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and his hair was neatly combed back, gleaming with the luster of hair oil. His face no longer had a messy beard, so he could only plaster a deep black stubble around his lips. His height was at least 5 centimeters taller than before. He was trying his best to look different from the worker from last night, making it impossible for anyone who wasn't particularly familiar with him to make any associations. In the pockets of his clothes and trousers, there was no all-black eye, no charms or herbal essential oils. There was only a deck of tarot cards, a stack of notes, a fountain pen, a wallet, some change, a bunch of keys and false reporter identification documents. He didn't know the Lenivas's current condition, nor did he know where the powerful beyonder lingering around him came from. Hence, out of precaution, he didn't bring any suspicious items. Looking at the two-story building ahead of him, Klein crossed the street, pretending to not rely on the clown's intuition to notice that several pairs of eyes were watching him. He pushed open the door and saw that the dock union's layout was rather simple. There were no female receptionists or spacious lobbies. The stairs to the second floor were in the middle, flanked by office corridors, and the floors weren't lined with wooden planks, much less carpet. They were paved purely out of cement. Klein turned his head to look at the man guarding by the door as he went over and said, "I'm a reporter from the Backland Daily Tribune. I would like to interview the workers of your association and get to know your needs and desires." The man was wearing a very patched jacket, which even had dirty cotton lining exposed, and a linen shirt underneath. After hearing the word reporter, he suddenly became vigilant and replied loudly, "No, we haven't organized a strike lately, no. I think you've misunderstood me. I'm someone who sympathizes with you. I'm planning on doing a special report on what the union does to help the workers and the actual difficulties they encountered. Trust me." With the help of his clown beyonder powers, Klein made his eyes look abnormally sincere. "Is that so? Go to Mr. Rand, our committee member in charge of publicity. Turn right, and it's the second office on the right." The man hesitated for a few seconds before replying, "Thank you." Klein bowed with feigned relief, and he felt the gaze observing him from a dark corner of the room vanish. He turned to his right, and, with his back perspiring in cold sweat, knocked on the office door. The door creaked open. A middle-aged man with sparse hair looked at him and asked, "May I know who you are, Mr. Rand?" "I'm reporter Statham from the Backland Daily Tribune. This is my reporter identification documents. I'd like to make a report with unions as the theme to help you acquire more attention." Klein almost believed he was a journalist. "That's me." The middle-aged man looked at the reporter's identification documents and said hesitatingly, clearly unwillingly, "It's hard for me to believe that you reporters are here to help us. I was born in East Borough, and I know how miserable the lives of the workers are. If you don't believe me, you can follow me the entire time and monitor my every question." Klein suddenly smiled and added, "A report with actual interview data would be better than nothing. Far better than news that's written purely based on imagination. At least you can provide your views and hopefully guide things in the direction you want." Rand touched his scalp and replied hesitantly, "All right then. I'll follow you the entire time." "Thank you." Klein almost lost control of his emotions. Afterward, under Rand's guidance, he entered one office after another, interviewing the members of the Workers' Association according to his prepared questions. Right corridor, nothing. Left corridor, nothing. Klein calmly went up the wooden stairs to the second floor. This time, Rand led him into the office directly opposite the staircase and introduced the people inside. "This is a reporter from the Backland Daily Tribune, Mr. Statham. He wants to interview the lot of you. But I have to remind you that there are some questions which you have the right to refuse to answer." Klein smiled, took 2 steps forward, and made a gesture to shake hands with each and every staff member in the room. At that moment, he saw a slightly familiar figure. Although the man's skin had turned bronze, his ordinary round face had become angular, and his glasses had changed from a round frame to a gold-rimmed frame. Klein still found a trace of familiarity from his spirituality as a seer. Immediately afterward, his body trembled, and the smile on his face almost went out of control. "I am sorry. I suddenly have a stomachache. May I ask where the washroom is?" Klein asked with an awkward smile, holding his stomach with the hand that didn't hold a pen and paper. Rand and the staff didn't suspect anything. They all pointed to the door and said, "Go out, turn left. When you reach the end, you'll see the sign." Klein smiled apologetically and walked out of the room, heading quickly for the washroom. Inside, he selected the cubicle closest to the window, sat on the toilet, and locked the wooden door behind him. He bent down, the corners of his mouth curving into a silent laugh. He laughed so hard he nearly couldn't keep his body straight. A drop of sparkling liquid fell onto the ground from his laughter. Klein had confirmed that it was Lenivus. This wasn't because of that small sense of familiarity, but because he felt another type of aura from the other party's body, one that left an extremely deep impression on him. This was also the main reason why he had nearly lost control on the spot. The trembling of his body originated from his instinctive fear. The collapse of his emotions came from the horror and sorrow deep within his memories. That was the aura of the true creator. Klein washed his face and went on with the interview as if nothing had happened. Even while facing Lenivus, who had somehow changed so much, he continued to ask questions and record the answers. After finishing all of this, he bade farewell to the Workers' Association and walked out of the dimly lit building. Outside, the sky was cloudy and misty, as if the evening had come early. The true creator's aura can only come from his body or spawn, as well as things that extend from the two. For example, items bestowed by him, or his godhood. This corroborates with what Lenivus said to Hoodeugen. In addition, there's that tinge of familiarity. I didn't even need to go above the gray fog for divination to confirm that it's him. If it wasn't for me having already interacted with the true creator a few times and coming close to his mental corruption, there's no way I could have recognized that aura to be his, which didn't contain any strength, and of his nature. Klein felt heavy emotions, but he appeared very relaxed. He stood on the street and purposely organized the interview notes. In the process, he caught a glimpse of a slightly familiar figure among the vagabonds across him. Miss Zio. Klein instantly made a guess with what he knew. He didn't stop, and he put away the notes before walking towards the tracked public carriage station. At this moment, a horse carriage suddenly stopped in front of him. We meet again. Sitting in the carriage was a thin, elegant, middle-aged gentleman with white hair at his temples. He was the great detective who was helping the police investigation, Isengard Stanton. As for Klein, he didn't look any different than usual. He was just a little taller, and had changed into a new set of clothes. What a coincidence! I was just thinking about the last time I interviewed you, Klein answered deliberately. Isengard suddenly understood, and changed the subject with a smile. I'm here to investigate a case. The death of Sibir has been eliminated, and I'm in charge of it. Her death is very close to East Balam Dock. So it's indeed a copycat crime? Klein feigned ignorance. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he got into the tracked public carriage. Instead of going straight home, he made a transfer and headed to the Quelag Club in Hillston. In the club's lounge, he quickly went above the gray fog to confirm that no one was following him. Only at this step did Klein completely relax and feel some lingering fear. The aura of the true creator lingered in his mind like a nightmare, leaving the clothes on his back moist after they repeatedly dried. To be sure, Klein conjured a yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen before writing a divination statement he had already long thought of, the source of the inexplicable familiarity earlier. Putting down his fountain pen and leaning back into his chair, he began to mumble as he entered the dream. In that gray and illusory world he saw a figure. This figure had ordinary facial features. He wore round glasses, and he had a condescending and taunting smile from beginning to end. He was none other than Lenivus. I've finally found you. Klein no longer used his clown ability to control his facial expressions, as he muttered to himself through clenched teeth. Then, he sat up straight and prepared to answer Miss Justice's prayer. Klein controlled his emotions and said in a deep but cold voice, "There's no need for confirmation. That is Lenivus. You can inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess and tell them that Lenivus has the godhood of the fallen creator." Audrey, who was watching her father train the hunting hounds with Susie, froze when she heard Mr. Fool's response. Fallen creator? Isn't that the true creator? That swindler actually has the godhood of the true creator? This such a simple mission actually involves the godhood of the true creator? As expected, I knew Mr. Fool had other deeper motives. He was targeting the true creator. As expected of Mr. Fool, many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. Chapter 285. Midnight Bell Tower. Audrey, who had set up an urgent communication method with Zio and Furs, quickly passed on Mr. Fool's message to the two ladies through the huge golden retriever, Susie, claiming that the information she had received came via other sources. In the corner of an old church, as Zio was thinking about how to confirm Lenivis's identity, or how she should create chaos and avenge Williams, she unfolded the ball of paper. There's no need to confirm. He's Lenivis? Zio's eyes widened as she quickly skimmed through the rest of the paper's content. The piece of paper clearly wrote, "The only choice is to notify the Church of the Evernight Goddess. Alert them that Lenivis has the godhood of the true creator on him." Godhood? The true creator's godhood? Zio blurted out as she looked at the golden retriever in front of her in shock, only to realize that she was equally dumbfounded. What? Furs was listening when she suddenly felt something was amiss. She hurriedly reached out for the piece of paper and scanned it. After a moment, she curled her lips and said at a loss, This must be a joke, right? How did we get involved in a matter that's tied to an evil god's godhood? This was meant to involve the capture of a cunning swindler, worth only 200 pounds. In response to Furs's question, Susie could only express the notion that she was only a dog, and that she didn't know what was happening either with her innocent eyes. Not expecting a dog to answer her questions, she turned her head to Zio and said, "I'm afraid Miss Audrey isn't as naive and innocent as we thought. She has many secrets. This might be a power struggle between a cult, the nobles and the church. However, it's evident that she didn't know about the matter of godhood prior to this. She's also being used by someone. That person could be her father, Count Hall. What's fortunate is that this matter ends here. You don't need to take the risk anymore. After you get someone to make the report, you just need to wait to collect the bounty in peace." Zio was startled and said, "That's true. Hopefully, those Nighthawks are able to avenge Williams. They're so strong, so they'll definitely be able to do it. Definitely." Before she finished speaking, she suddenly turned her head to the side and spoke as if she was talking to herself. "I'm still too weak." "Too weak?" Zio jerked her hand up, covering her mouth and nose. "I'm still too weak. If not for that, I would have chosen to take revenge myself. But right now I can only take a step back. Not to mention there's Giant, and those hidden helpers around Lenivis. With just his godhood, he isn't someone I can deal with. With the reaction speed of the Nighthawks, they'll likely take action tonight once they receive the report. The Backlund Diocese is second only to the church's headquarters. They have many sealed artifacts and many powerful beyonders. There's no need to wait for any additional helpers." After completing his task of informing Audrey, Klein returned to the real world. He stuck on a beard, changed his hairstyle, and stared into the mirror for several minutes. He felt anticipation and excitement, as well as depression and a sense of powerlessness. Before the evening arrived, he left the Quelag Club and returned to Minsk Street. On his way, he went to the grocery market and found a stall that was bustling with its great business. He bought several masks, including a clown's. He had decided to watch the hunt for Lenivis tonight. He wanted to see the other party pay the price for his madness with his own eyes. Of course, with his strength, he could only watch from a distance, and not even have the right to approach them. By 11 o'clock, when many people were in their dreams, Klein changed into his grayish-blue worker's uniform and disguised himself as he had the night before. Then he put on his cap, walked a few streets away, and took a rental carriage to the Backlund Bridge area. Once there, he switched to walking and walked all the way to the East Balham dock. His interview yesterday included questions such as, "Where are you staying now?" and "How's the environment like?" Therefore, he knew very well that Lenivis would be staying in the dormitory provided by the dock union at night. However, Klein didn't go near it. Instead, he carefully went around it. His target was the clock tower of the East Balham dock. In Backlund, in addition to the large church with its tall, iconic clock tower, many government buildings were also equipped with one. However, they weren't necessarily tall, grand, and not ornate. It was mostly built for pragmatic reasons, such as this one in the East Balham dock. Compared to the surrounding buildings that reached a maximum of 3 stories, it was like a giant that stood high in the night sky as it overlooked the entire area. Klein easily entered the interior of the clock tower and went up the endless flight of spiral stairs as he moved quickly in the darkness. Finally, he arrived at his destination. He arrived at the top of the gigantic wall clock. It was surrounded by a dark yellow fence, and at the top of his head was a steeple that could be reached by stretching his hand. Taking a few steps forward, Klein hid in the shadows, got a sense of his bearings, and looked towards the dock union's dormitory. It was a 2-story brick-red building, and the occasional pedestrian resembled a black dot in Klein's eyes. He stared for a few seconds, then took a step back, and sank into the darkness. At the same time, he took out his newly bought mask and wore it. It was a clown with the corner of its mouth sharply raised and a painted red nose. A happy clown. Wearing a clown mask, Klein stood in the rich darkness, patiently waiting for the predetermined show. He waited for 2 hours. When the hands of the large wall clock passed 1 o'clock, he suddenly saw something flying from the distance. It was a huge airship covered in dark black paint. If it weren't for the faint moonlight, it would have been indistinguishable from the night sky. Unlike what was described in the newspapers and magazines, depicting them as machines that emitted exaggerated mechanical noises, its oars rotated quietly, as silent as a vulture who had found its prey but hadn't found a chance. The solid light alloy supported the cotton frame, and below it hung the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons. At a glance, it appeared to be a powerful deterrent. It's silent. Is this a temporary result caused by beyonder means? Klein, wearing his clown mask, looked at the slowly descending airship and made a guess. At this moment, he was most puzzled over the dispatch of an airship for a small-scale beyonder battle in a densely populated area of the city. Aren't they afraid of dealing collateral damage to the surrounding citizens? Aren't they afraid of causing panic? Very soon, the airship hovered about 10 meters in the air. This way, Klein was even less worried about being discovered. His position was much higher than them. Observing the situation below, he suddenly had a hunch. It was likely that the airship wouldn't engage in combat, but rather provide air surveillance of the area to give the personnel involved in the operation a better view and prevent the target from escaping if any accidents occurred. Right at this moment, 3 figures dressed in black robes suddenly appeared in front of the 2-story brick-red building. The man in the lead didn't wear a hat, revealing his short golden-brown hair and blackish-green eyes, which appeared to be as deep as a windless lake. The collars of his shirt and windbreaker were propped up high, and his palms were covered with a layer of gloves that were as red as blood. A silver-white metal suitcase was wound around his left hand via a chain of the same color. This was one of the 9 high-ranking deacons of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Crestet Sesamir. He was also one of the 3 powerhouses of the Red Gloves, and he happened to be in Backlund. After looking straight ahead, Sesamir turned his head to the left and said to his subordinate, "Use sealed artifact 1 to 63. "Yes, Your Grace." The Nighthawk crouched down and helped Sesamir untie the chain around the silver suitcase. Throughout the entire process, Crestet Sesamir's muscles were very tense, as though he was fighting something. The Nighthawk on the left took a deep breath and pressed down suddenly, causing the illusionary ripples on the surface of the silver box to crack. The surrounding halo suddenly disappeared, as if it was completely sucked into the case. A bone sword, that was less than a meter long, emitted glossy, pure white light as it slowly floated up. Its blade had an ancient silver-coated mirror attached to it. The scenes reflected in the mirror were layered and superimposed without end. The Nighthawk on the left took the mirror and pointed it at the brick-red building. The building was clearly reflected in it, and nothing seemed to change. However, Sesamir slowly exhaled, stretched out his left hand to grasp the short bone sword. The surrounding halo was somewhat restored. "Let's go in." He started walking towards the entrance of the brick building. The 3 Nighthawks opened the door and entered the dark building and targeted the stairs that led to the second floor. At that moment, a tall, thin figure emerged from the shadows in the corner. He wore a black priest's uniform, and he had curly pale yellow hair and beastly dark brown eyes. "You're the goddess's sword?" The nearly 2-meter tall giant spoke in a deep voice. At the same time, he clenched his right palm. Bang! 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 The Union members in this small brick-red building exploded one after another in their dreams, without even having the chance to scream. Their bodies split into pieces, turning into thick, sticky flesh. Half of their bodies rushed towards the giant, to weave into cloaks that could reduce magical damage. The other half condensed into furry giant rugs that blanketed the three Nighthawks. Christette Casimir only watched silently without doing anything. Silently, the flesh and blood dissipated and collapsed before falling down like rain. But the raindrops didn't stain the floor red. In each of the rooms, figures emerged once more, still sleeping soundly. This is the world within a mirror world that only targets beyonders. The flesh bombs you planted in the bodies of the ordinary people are only illusions in here. Casimir raised the holy artifact bone sword in his right hand, causing the light around him to disappear. Humph! The giant suddenly grabbed his left shoulder with his right hand and tore off his arm. He then threw the blood arm forward. Boom! His arm exploded like a bomb, turning into a rain of blood that rained down on the three Nighthawks. At the same time, the flesh on his left shoulder began to squirm madly as he slowly grew a new arm, which was still bloody without any skin. Smack! 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 Sizzle! The blood-colored raindrops accurately avoided Casimir and the others before falling to the ground and quickly corroding into deep, dark traces. But no matter how hard they tried, they always missed the three Nighthawks by a hair's breadth, as if they were fated to do so. My enemies aren't always lucky enough. The corners of Casimir's mouth curled up, and with a slip of his foot, he instantly appeared in front of Giant. Giant's eyes narrowed as his body suddenly melted like a candle, turning into sticky flesh and blood that quickly seeped into the floor. Casimir immediately kneeled and plunged the holy artifact bone sword into the ground. No! In the rich darkness, a roar filled with pain and horror instantly sounded, and it was immediately swallowed up by tranquility and serenity. Casimir stood up and drew out the bone sword. A drop of dark red blood was slowly dripping down its tip, and on the floor, flesh and blood were seeping out, congealing into a face of despair. It was precisely the giant, who had a slightly drooping mouth. Pat! 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 3 shadows appeared around Casimir in succession. However, they all mysteriously collapsed to the ground, having been forcefully taken down by many invisible entities. Bang! 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 Another Nighthawk fired, and the silver surface of the bullet seemed to bear the Evernight sacred emblem. The 3 attackers hiding in the shadows suddenly revealed themselves, twitching as they lost their breath. Rose Bishop, Shadow Ascetic. People from the Aurora Order. Casimir frowned and said in a low voice without turning to his companions, "There's something wrong about this. It's very strange. All of you be careful." Before he could finish his words, he heard the shuffling of footsteps which echoed in the silence and serenity. Immediately, he saw Lenivis with his chiseled face dressed in a linen shirt walking down the dark staircase. He appeared calm and placid without any signs of fear. "I'm very curious. To the Aurora Order, you should be a blasphemer. Why would they send people to protect you?" Casimir didn't seem to notice the abnormality as he asked casually. Lenivis showed his trademark taunting smile and said, "That's simple. Because I'm no longer just Lenivis." He paused for a moment, and his gaze suddenly turned cold. "Now, I'm even more of the true creator." He yanked open his linen shirt, revealing the dark red flesh of his skinless chest and abdomen. The flesh and blood were conjoined together, forming the figure of a hanged man. All of a sudden, the void around them shattered like glass, and all the scenes around them crumbled. This was the aura of a deity. Chapter 286. A taunting smile in the clock tower of East Balam Dock. Klein hid in the darkness while donning a clown mask as he quietly stared at the dormitory of the Dock Union. An airship floated above. He couldn't see the details of the battle, and he had no way of knowing the developments of the operation in the red brick building. All he could do was endure and determine the situation by observing the changes in the surroundings and the occasional black dot that passed by. Just then, he saw all the gas lamps in the area extinguish. All of them had been extinguished. It was pitch black there. Right on the heels of that, A feeling that left an extremely deep impression on him exploded from the small red brick building. Even from a long distance away, Klein couldn't help but tremble all over. His legs went soft, and he bent his waist. It was the feeling of being looked down upon, a feeling that repressed one's spirit. It was a feeling that was impossible to resist or face. No, don't look directly at God. In his adrift thoughts, Klein seemed to recall the time when he was in the hall of the Blackthorn Security Company. It was like when he was about to activate his spirit vision to probe the mental state of Megos and the baby in her womb. That feeling was exactly the same as it was now. No, it's even more extreme and terrifying right now. How could this be? Wasn't Lenivis just bestowed with a little bit of the true creator's godhood? At most, he would be given one or two other corresponding items. Why does it feel like an evil god is about to descend? Before Klein could shake off the trembling of his body and the numbing of his thoughts, he suddenly felt a deep, serene, and profound darkness engulfing the feeling that couldn't be looked at, probed, or resisted. The two sensations were obliterated at the same time, causing the gas lamps in the surrounding area to light up once again. The airship, which couldn't stop itself from plummeting, floated back up again. Everything seemed to return to its original state, without the slightest change. But Klein didn't believe that everything was over. He stood up with all his might, knowing that something important had happened in the red brick building. The feeling that exceeds a beyonder, at a fundamental level, is no longer there, nor is there the feeling of the descent of an evil god. This means that the true creator, or Lenivis's plot, has failed. However, the Nighthawks must have suffered some sort of serious blow as well. They might not even have much strength left. At that moment, Klein's heart stirred. He quickly took out the spirit pendulum inside his left sleeve, holding it with one hand as he said in a low voice, "Lenivis is no longer dangerous at the moment." After quickly repeating it 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw that the topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise. However, its frequency wasn't fast, and its amplitude wasn't large. This showed that Lenivis was still a dangerous man, but to a lesser degree. What caught Klein's attention was something else. The divination hadn't failed again. This meant that Lenivis had been separated from the godhood bestowed upon him by the true creator. A cold wind blew, seeping deep into Klein's bones, causing him to shiver. He felt as if an electric current had instantly drilled into his brain from the soles of his feet. Maybe I can do something. He suddenly had this thought and no longer hesitated. He took 4 steps counterclockwise in the dark clock tower and went above the gray fog. Without wasting any time, he sat down and conjured a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and wrote a divination statement. Lenivis's escape route. Klein leaned back, quickly chanted the statement, and entered a deep dream. In that illusory, separated misty world, he saw the slush-filled sewers with their dark, dirty tunnels and rusty metal pipes. It was cramped and sealed. It's the sewers. Klein immediately woke up, enveloped his body with spirituality, and descended into the gray fog. As soon as he returned to the real world, he took a few steps back and came to the side of the clock tower that faced away from the airship. Klein didn't walk down the spiral stairs, but instead somersaulted over the dark yellow fence. With the help of the platform, the bulging spots, and the decorations on the surface of the building, he jumped down level by level. His body was so balanced it was as though he was walking on the ground. In a very short period of time, his feet stepped on the thick flagstones on the street. Inside the small red brick building, 2 Nighthawks wearing red gloves had collapsed by the door unconscious. The ancient silver-plated mirror had rolled to a corner, but it was no longer special. It no longer looked anything like a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, one could clearly feel that it was recovering bit by bit. Christet Casimir was kneeling at an intersection. A stream of tear-like blood streaked down the corners of his eyes. His short, golden-brown hair hung limply, and his standing collars on his windbreaker and shirt were in tatters, revealing his relatively sharp chin and his thin, stiff mouth. Gasping for air, a distorted, semi-illusory, and translucent face appeared on each of his teeth. Casimir braced himself with his left red-gloved hand on the ground. With difficulty, he straightened his neck and looked straight ahead. Directly in front of him was the staircase to the second floor. above which stood Lenivus, who had his linen shirt completely unbuttoned. Lenivus stood very straight, with the pure white, smooth bone sword stuck in his chest. The skinless flesh no longer formed the outline of the hanging man's figure, leaving behind a void. Vaguely, one could even see his back through the hole in Lenivus's body. Lenivus moved with great difficulty, before suddenly laughing loudly. He said with a maniacal laugh, "Ha ha ha ha, thank you. I really need to thank you. For real. Look at my sincere eyes. I really want to thank you. If you hadn't discovered me and arrived in time, I would truly become the vessel of the true Creator when he descends in a few months. When that happens, how different would it be from dying?" Casimir was stunned when he heard that. He refused to believe that the person who had his crutch destroyed thanks to his hard work would be so happy. At that moment he wished to stand, but he couldn't. He was also powerless to resist. When Lenivus saw his confusion, he coughed and said with a smile, "Do you know, to people like me, it's the most miserable thing when there's no one to share a great accomplishment that I'm proud of. Cough. When I was in Tianjin City, I was deceived by the true Creator, who not only initiated the descent of his spawn, but he also secretly planted a sapling in my body. No, I even believe that Migos' child was just his ruse. He didn't even get the members of the Aurora Order to protect her to divert attention. It was as though he knew from the beginning that the ploy would end in failure. His true descent was set up inside me. The godhood he bestowed upon me suddenly combined with the sapling in my body after I reached Backland. Haha, can you imagine that? I was being replaced bit by him. In the end, I would become the true Creator. Before I came up with a solution, I was found by the members of the Aurora Order through the godhood. Thankfully, they're all lunatics with simple brains. Haha, there are always so many fools. Cough, cough, cough. Lenivus spat out a mouthful of foul blood, seemingly recovering some of his mobility. He took a difficult step forward, and his chiseled face suddenly turned soft for some unknown reason, as he began resembling his original self. Lenivus reached out to the staircase's handrail and laughed tauntingly. Thankfully, if the true Creator wishes to fully descend and completely replace me, he'll need large amounts of pessimism, despair, numbness, resentment, and primitive evil. Only Backland, only East Borough, the factory and dock area, could satisfy his requirements. This gave me a chance to interact with others. I knew that it was unrealistic to report this to the police simply through the people I interacted with, because the people I come in contact could very well be members of the Aurora Order. I initially wanted to instigate a strike to get the police to notice me, but I was warned by someone from the Aurora Order. After being tortured, I could only hastily end it. I acted as though I was on the brink of losing control, and had gained the opportunity to head into the sewers to vent. During this process, I secretly used my blood to corrupt the creatures living in there, turning them into terrifying mutated monsters. Unfortunately, before you could fully investigate the reason behind it, it was discovered by the Aurora Order. Apparently, a member of theirs died under a mutated monster. Sigh. Now that I no longer have the godhood or the sapling, my blood no longer has such effects. After that, I was controlled even more strictly, but I still found an opportunity. I killed a prostitute and used the cruelest method to attract the attention of the police. But who would have thought that the people of the Aurora Order would disguise the case as part of series of serial murders? I still failed to receive the rescue I needed. Out of similar opportunities, I could only use a more ingenious method. I took the initiative to request for the fiercest, craziest, most radical member of the Aurora Order to watch me, and this suited their thoughts. Can't they use their brains? Such a lunatic would get into trouble at any moment. As expected, you guys came. Phew. At that moment, Lenivus exhaled and began to move his body, as if he had finally gotten rid of the remnant effects. He pulled out the holy bone sword from his chest and said regretfully, "What a pity. I can't take it with me, otherwise, I would be quickly tracked and found by you." After the pure white bone sword completely separated from his body, not a single drop of blood remained from the exaggerated wound. The part that had disappeared didn't seem to belong to Lenivus. Lenivus pressed his right hand against his chest, bowing as he faced Christette Casimir and company. The people on the airship outside should be recovering soon. I can't stay any longer. Thank you very much. Although you're all very stupid, you still ultimately helped me. It's an honor for foolish bastards like yourselves. Having said this, he straightened his body and smiled tauntingly. Goodbye, foolish Nighthawks. Use your lives to send me off. Grasping the bone sword in his hand, he abruptly took a few steps forward, attempting to stab at Christette Casimir. But at that moment, his eyelids began to grow heavy, as he felt like collapsing into a slumber. So you still have some strength. This is troublesome. Lenivus bit his tongue gently, and suddenly threw the holy bone sword at the unconscious Nighthawk by the door. No! Casimir waved his hand with the strength he accumulated through painstaking means, causing an invisible entity to divert the holy bone sword. Lenivus seized that opportunity and dashed to the side. He somersaulted out the red brick building through the window at the washroom at the end of the corridor. Soon after, he opened a manhole cover along the streets and quickly climbed into the sewers. Lenivus seemed to be very familiar with this place. Even though it was dark, he could still run, jump, and turn, quickly fleeing deep into the maze of sewers. Suddenly, he instinctively stopped and leaned back. Oof! A card had stabbed deep into his right chest and blood began dripping profusely from its edge. Lenivus looked up, and with his ability to see in the dark, he saw his attacker. It was a medium-sized man in a worker's uniform, wearing a mask with a raised mouth and red nose. It was a happy clown. Chapter 287. Death battle. The moment their eyes met, Lenivus suddenly ducked and rolled forward. Clang! A tarot card, with an angel and trumpet, shot out sharply like a dagger, embedding itself into the wall of the sewer, and its position was at the same height as Lenivus's neck just moments before. Clang! 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 Lenivus either rolled, jumped to his side, or threw himself forward, nimbly avoiding the three cards that came in succession with abnormal agility. Their collision with the walls, slabs, and concrete echoed like metal striking a wall. Meanwhile, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the man in the clown mask was following him closely, not much slower than he was. In his hand was a thick stack of cards as he launched them with great familiarity and skill. On the surface of an approaching card was a sun with 5 facial features. With his left hand, Lenivus propped himself up against the wall and leaped into the air, drastically changing his course. At that moment, he heard a swishing sound before suddenly feeling a sharp pain in his ankle. He launched 2 cards. One arrived slightly late and was aimed in the direction I was escaping in. Can he foresee my movements? The moment he landed on the ground, Lenivus endured the pain and rolled once again. Clang! Another tarot card embedded itself into his original position, resonating constantly in response to the impact. It was only then that Lenivus noticed a card deeply embedded in his right ankle. The card depicting stars, water containers, and holy water stained in red. So. Lenivus didn't even have the luxury of time to think or treat his injuries. One after another, the cards turned into seemingly sharp flying daggers, shooting at different parts of his body. Very soon, the injuries on his right leg and chest, and the remnant effects from the hole in his chest, as well as the prior demigod-level clash caused this Sequence 9 Marauder to turn sluggish. This was in contrast to the nimbleness and speed that Marauders were known for. Pow! He sent a card flying, but a deep laceration tore through his wrist, one that kept bleeding profusely. The Nighthawks and the military will be coming soon. I can't delay any longer. At this moment, Lenivus's mind was very clear. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and stopped dodging, allowing a card depicting the devil to strike him squarely in the neck. In almost an instant, the cards sticking out from his body were sent flying. The hideous wounds on his neck, right chest, wrist, and ankle were all squirming madly, sprouting one meat tendril after another in disgusting shapes. On his skin, numerous small goosebumps appeared. These goosebumps had a metallic tint to them, as if they had turned into a set of armor. Clang! A tarot card was shot over, but it was deflected by the fine goosebumps. With bloodshot eyes, Lenivus stared at the clown who had put away his cards after coming to a halt. he said, half laughing and half mocking. No matter what, after being tormented by a deity, one will always get something in return. Before he could finish his words, he had already jumped over the polluted waters in the canal with his left foot, throwing himself at the enemy opposite him. As if expecting this, Klein stepped to the side, pulled his left hand out of his pocket, clenched it into a fist, and threw it at Lenivus's temple. Bam! Lenivus swung his elbow sideways and raised his forearm, accurately hitting his opponent's fist. The explosive force surged like a torrential tide, causing Klein's body to move from the impact as he staggered a little. Pa! 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 Crisp explosive blasts sounded in Klein's ear. Punches, each heavier and faster than the last, constantly reflected into his eyes. The flurry of attacks made him seem to forget to maintain his balance. He staggered and fell to the side, then, with the support of his left elbow, he rolled in a different direction. Smack! 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 Bang! 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 Lenivus's punches and kicks came quickly and furiously, almost hitting Klein quite a few times. But thanks to his exaggerated balance and movements that defied common sense, he managed to dodge successfully. At times he would be on the wall, and at other times on the ground. It was as though he was performing an acrobatic act. He appeared very calm without the slightest bit of impatience. It was as though he had decided to drag out the battle, as long as possible, until the Nighthawks and the military arrived. And once there were any signs of Lenivus's attempting to escape, he was hell-bent on pestering him, and not give him an opportunity to do so. Pa! Lenivus's punch forced Klein to use the rebound from the wall to fly back into the air. And as for him himself, he didn't hesitate to turn around and flee towards another tunnel. The moment Klein's toes touched the ground, his body shot out like a cannonball as he pounced straight for Lenivus's back. At that moment, an image appeared in his mind. It seems as if Lenivus has no bones. I should force him to twist his upper body and land a punch on his body. This was a clown's intuition. Without any doubts or hesitation, Klein took the initiative to reduce his subsequent strength. With a smacking sound, he still threw himself forward, but it was much weaker than he expected. Gotcha! With a jarring noise, Lenivus twisted his upper body suddenly while his legs remained immobile. His face faced backward as his toes pointed forward. In such a terrifying scene, Lenivus threw a punch towards Klein's head. The force of the punch was so strong that even the air produced an explosive boom. Boom! His fist hit nothing but air. And his fist was still 20 or 30 centimeters from Klein's face. The winds, that stirred from the punch, blew through Klein's hair. But he didn't take the opportunity to attack the enemy. Instead, he croaked a single word in ancient Hermes, crimson. A charm. Lenivus scrunched his face, as he immediately jumped to the side in a bid to dodge the impending attack. However, Klein had yet to throw out the charm. Instead, he clenched his left fist tightly and followed in the direction of Lenivus. He similarly threw himself to the side and rolled on the ground as well, causing the distance between them to only widen slightly. It was a bluff. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the highly raised corners of the clown's mouth were clearly reflected in his eyes. There was also a dark red flame, which had unknowingly ignited in the clown's left fist. Lenivus's gaze immediately froze. A light crackling sound entered his ears, and a calm, tranquil feeling emanated instantly, enveloping him and Klein. What is he trying to do? He wants both of us to be affected at the same time, to allow for the Nighthawks and military to rush here in time. Lenivus's eyelids drooped heavily, and the fatigue and weakness he had been suppressing began to rear their heads uncontrollably. He did his best not to fall asleep, hoping to rely on the uniqueness of his body to endure through the most intense period of the charm's slumbering effects. As for Klein, he didn't choose to resist at all, and quickly entered a deep slumber. However, whenever he fell asleep unnaturally, he would instinctively wake up. This was the unique thing about him when fighting mediumship and dream invasions. This was the reason why he had been lucky enough to escape from the hands of Madame Sharon back in Tingen. In the fight just now, after throwing his cards proved ineffective, he immediately took out the slumber charm and gripped it tightly in his palm. waiting for the opportunity to affect himself and his enemy. In just a split second, he forcibly broke free from the abnormal state of mind in his dream. The figure of the staggering Lenivus was clearly reflected in his eyes. Phew! Klein suddenly became very calm, as though what was before him was nothing but a target. He took a deep breath, turned his waist, and pulled back his shoulder before thrusting his fist forward with all his strength. Bam! Kacha! His fist landed ruthlessly at Lenivus's throat, breaking his bones and splattering his flesh. Lenivus took 2 steps back and leaned against the wall. That intense pain finally allowed him to extricate himself from the slumbering effects, but the fine iron-colored goosebumps on his body were all gone. After Klein's punch landed, he reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out 2 cards. So. The 2 cards each stabbed into an eye as scarlet liquid gushed out. Lenivus surprisingly endured the pain without letting out a tragic cry. Instead, he abruptly threw himself forward in a bid to make his last stand. Klein didn't take advantage of the situation to attack. Having long expected this, he turned his body to the side and took a step back. Right on the heels of that, while seizing the moment when Lenivus's fell forward, he took 2 steps and arrived behind him. He reached out with his arms and grabbed his enemy's neck. Kacha! Klein's arms exerted force, and he suddenly turned around, twisting Lenivus's neck. After doing all of this, he took 2 steps back and looked at his enemy. With the card embedded in him, Lenivus looked ahead weakly as he slumped to the ground. At the same time, he was very confused and asked in a staccato manner, "Why? Do you want to kill me?" With his clown mask on, Klein stared at his archenemy and replied indifferently, "No reason." "No." With his eyes wide open, Lenivus collapsed to the ground in the sewers, unable to accept his fate. Finally, his breathing came to a stop. At that moment, Klein, who seemed to be extremely calm, suddenly stepped forward, tightened his right leg, and with all his strength, kicked him in the head. Bam! His neck, which was already badly mutilated, could no longer bear the pressure, and was sent flying like a rubber ball. It slammed heavily into the wall, creating a red and white patch. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly crouched down. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. He laughed crazily with a suppressed voice. The clown mask looked so very happy. The corners of those raised lips, the bright red nose, and that white face wore a very happy expression. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha ha. Klein laughed so much that he went out of breath. His laughter was more jarring than crying. After a few seconds, he finally calmed down. He slowly straightened his body and winked with his left eye at the darkest part of the sewer. Then he smirked and muttered to himself, "Captain. Look, we've saved Lone once again." Droplets of liquid quietly slid down and landed on his collar. At that moment, he felt that his clown potion had been digested completely. Chapter 288. A scene filled with symbolism in the dark sewer. Klein wiped his neck and turned his attention back to Lenivus's cracked head and decapitated body before turning to the 2 tarot cards that were stuck in Lenivus's eyes. He originally wanted to retrieve all the projectiles that he had thrown and wipe the scene of any clues. However, he realized a very real and extremely serious problem. He didn't have the vision to see in complete darkness. He had relied on his spirit vision to rush through the pitch-black sewers and engage in the intense battle with Lenivus. He could see the colors of Lenivus's aura, the spirituality radiance of all sorts of critters, and could faintly use the light's illumination to distinguish the path. Unfortunately, the tarot cards he was currently using weren't the same as the ones that had originated from the Nighthawks. It didn't have any spirituality or silver engravings, and it was completely ordinary, with no special characteristics. In such an environment, Klein could use his own aura's color and spirituality radiance to create a tiny radius around him, where he could distinguish things. However, he couldn't see the cards stuck in the walls and ground, as well as the cards that had scattered everywhere. In the intense battle with Lenivus, they hadn't restricted themselves to a particular spot. Of course, he believed that as long as he had enough time, it wouldn't be difficult to find all the cards he had thrown out. But the main problem was that the Nighthawks and the military on board the airship would arrive at any minute. I can't be too careless regarding this. I've been wearing gloves all this time. This deck of tarot cards was bought before coming to Backland, and is standard across the nation. I don't usually use it. Most of the time, even if I have it with me, it's placed together with Mr. Azek's copper whistle. Regardless of what methods are used, it would be very difficult to locate me through them. At most, they would be able to restore a portion of the battle scene. I donned a mask, and my shoes are padded. All sorts of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, and he quickly came to a decision. He turned to the headless corpse and crouched down. Reaching out with his black-gloved right hand, he quickly searched for any items left behind. Klein didn't have the intention of carrying out a mediumship ritual. Firstly, the feeling of the evil god's descent had left a deep impression on him, so he didn't dare to blindly channel Lenivis's spirit unless he brought it above the gray fog with him. Secondly, with the situation of the Nighthawks and military arriving at any time, he didn't feel that he had enough time to set up the ritual of summoning himself, responding to himself, and then going up above the gray fog and channeling the spirit. I should give up when it's necessary, Klein silently muttered to himself, and he withdrew his hand from Lenivis's body. This crazy swindler seemed to be in a hurry when escaping. He didn't bring any cash, materials, or charms. He only had an eye-sized badge on him, which coruscated a faint spirituality radiance. Klein wasn't afraid that this item could be used to locate him, as he planned on throwing it above the gray fog later to study it slowly. Therefore, he stood up and put the badge in his pocket. He stole a glance at Lenivis's corpse, and without waiting for the Beyonder characteristic to appear, he used his left black-gloved hand to remove the remaining tarot cards. Then he stretched out his left arm and placed his palm directly above the Lenivis's corpse. All of a sudden, Klein released his grip, allowing the tarot cards to fall, like leaves cascading over the headless corpse. Some of them faced up with pictures and numbers printed on them, whilst others had dark red patterns on their backs. After doing all of this, Klein took out Azek's copper whistle and tossed it a few times. Then, without looking back, he ran deep into the sewers. After almost 2 minutes, figures finally arrived at this place. Some of them were wearing thick black windbreakers, while others were wearing well-tailored military uniforms. The leader of the group was Christet Sesamir, who was carrying a pure white bone sword. His red gloves were smeared with dust, and his determined face showed obvious signs of fatigue and frailty. They stopped a few meters away from the body, and through the means of their night vision, they could see Lenivis's corpse and his head against the wall. There were 2 tarot cards stuck in his head. One was the Emperor, and the other was Wheel of Fortune. The headless body was covered with even more cards, each separately depicting the Chariot, the Hermit, Death, and more cards of different suits comprising of chalice, scepters, etc. On the walls and on the ground around him, there were also tarot cards such as the Devil, the Sun, and Judgment. It all looked like the scene of some bizarre ritual, and Lenivis was the sacrificial offering that was destined to be sacrificed. Christet Sesamir drew a silent gasp as he knitted his brows tightly. The Beyonders around him fell into a momentary daze at the sight of this frightening and mysterious scene in the darkness. Far away from the scene of Lenivis's death, Klein quickly found an exit and left. He took off his clown mask and, in the shadows of the gas lamps, walked quickly towards East Borough. Before that, he had already dealt with the stains on the soles of his shoes. It was only when he reached Black Palm Street in the East Borough did he breathe a slight sigh of relief. Then, he quickly held the ritual of summoning himself inside his rented 1-bedroom apartment and responded to himself. In his spiritual body state, Klein moved all the clothes he had worn tonight, as well as the remaining charms, herbs, and essential oils, as well as the badge he had obtained from Lenivis, to the space above the gray fog. Then, he used a spiritual flame to burn the corresponding clues. Phew. He exhaled and finally had time to take a look at what the badge he had taken from Lenivis looked like. This badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the front was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes. You can join if you have this item. What does it mean? Was Lenivis also a member of some secret organization? Klein rubbed his temples. in a situation where he was physically and mentally exhausted. Along with the fact that the timing wasn't right, he decided to give up on his research and leave it till after the Tarot Club's gathering. He quickly left the mysterious space above the gray fog, changed into another set of clothes, and removed his disguise. However, he was in no hurry to return to Minsk Street. He planned to sleep for the night before leaving. This was because it was easy to be inspected after midnight, especially when such an accident had just occurred. He lay down on the bed, looked out the window at the moonlight's encroaching of the darkness, and gradually calmed down. After completing his initial revenge, he felt that he had relieved himself of a lot of his burdens and lost a lot of his pressure. His mental state was clearly much better than before. The present me isn't capable of handling ensanguined and sealed artifact 0-08. Besides, the gap between us is huge. Only after becoming a high-sequence beyonder, a demigod, would I have the qualifications to involve myself in such matters. Before advancing to sequence 4, I'll act as though they don't exist. Yeah, for the foreseeable future. My goal is to work hard to improve myself. Now that I've completely digested the clown potion, I can advance to magician once the beyonder ingredients are gathered. There's still Faceless, Nimblewright Master, and the corresponding sequence for which I don't know the name of. Other than that, I'll just be an ordinary detective. Klein's mind was calm and peaceful, and his thoughts were scattered as he thought about his future arrangements. He was no longer cranky or that depressed. As he thought about it, the corners of his lips curled up slightly as he silently muttered to himself. Captain Benson, Melissa, I believe all of you would prefer to see me like this. At dawn, a group of people wearing surgical hats and white masks came to the dock union's dormitory. They were all dressed as doctors. The elder in the lead appeared to be rich in experience, as he said to the puzzled and confused residents. We've discovered an infectious disease in this building. A person named Kevin has already passed away because of it. We will provide free treatment. This infectious disease has a special drug, and as long as you take it in time, you'll be fine. Kevin. One by one, the guests exclaimed in astonishment as they looked around for their colleague named Kevin. However, they didn't find him at all. That was Lenivas's alias. Seeing that the charity medical team was accompanied by police officers, the residents no longer had any doubts and began to line up nervously to collect their medicine. The first was a middle-aged man with a bushy beard. He nervously asked all sorts of questions, afraid that a single bottle of medicine wasn't potent enough to fight off the infectious disease. It wasn't until the doctors showed their impatience that he drank the blue bottle of medicine. Then he was helped to the side and aimed his mouth at a hole that was of the same size. Ugh, ugh, ugh. The man suddenly felt nauseous as he violently vomited a putrid blob of a bloody substance. He was about to prop himself up and cast his gaze to see what he had just vomited when two strong nurses yanked him away. The mouth-sized hole was located above an iron-black metal barrel. The bottom of the barrel was dark and deep, with almost no light coming from it. And right there, a pool of yellowish-green liquid was quietly resting at the bottom. In the middle of the pool was a small piece of blood-colored meat. Ugh, ugh, ugh. One by one, the residents took the medicine and vomited in front of different metal barrels. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. Why did you suddenly visit so early? Audrey looked at the sky outside, then she looked at Viscount Glaint. Glaint looked around, and only found a golden retriever sitting beside him. Hence he whispered. I was planning to go to the turf club, but I met Kantz on the way. He told me something very interesting. It's truly interesting. Since I was passing by here, I thought of coming to share it with you. What is it? Audrey asked with interest. Glaint didn't deliberate over his words as he replied. You should have heard of the Aurora Order, right? It was the Aurora Order that assassinated the Intis ambassador. They were caught, with several important members killed, and a very large ploy was foiled as a result. I thought it was something related to the godhood of the true creator. Zio and Fur sent someone to report the information yesterday evening, and it just so happened that an operation was held last night. Wait, the Aurora Order apparently worships the true creator. Audrey's eyes lit up. She pressed in a reserved tone. What ploy? I don't know, Kantz refused to say. You just told me that the person in charge of this ploy was once a wanted swindler. A swindler named Lenevis. Glaint spread out his right hand. As expected, Audrey nodded indiscernibly. She didn't conceal her curiosity and asked, "Was he caught?" "He's dead, but he wasn't killed by our people." Glaint paused for a moment. "This is what I meant by interesting. When his body was found, it was covered with many tarot cards. Same for the surroundings. You can imagine that scene." "Tarot cards? The body was covered with tarot cards?" Audrey was startled at first before it hit her. "This was done by our tarot club." It was Mr. Fool's adorer. Chapter 289. Conjecture and Investigation. Audrey, who thought she knew the truth, couldn't help but imagine the scene described by Viscount Glaint. Lenevis lying in the mud in the darkness, covered with rows and rows of tarot cards. There's the Fool, Justice, the Hanged Man, the Sun, the World, and the other major arcana cards and numerous numbered cards. They would either be overturned or facing right up, and there would be some left unturned, exposing only their backs, as if they were all part of a large-scale, eerie tarot divination. This kind of scene must be very shocking. I wonder where the card for justice landed. How would the Beyonders of MI9 and the Church view this matter? Would they believe that a new secret organization has appeared? By possessing the godhood of the true creator, the ploy between Lenevis and the Aurora Order must definitely be significant. It definitely would have brought a terrible disaster to Backlund and the kingdom. Yet, this ploy was so easily foiled because of a simple mission Mr. Fool had issued. This is a tussle at the level of deities? Mr. Fool and the true creator are considered archenemies? It's no wonder he calls the other party the fallen creator. Many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as her body trembled faintly and imperceptibly. "What are you thinking about?" Viscount Glaint, who was sitting opposite, finally couldn't hold it in any further as he asked in puzzlement. Audrey abruptly snapped out of her reverie. Slightly cocking her head, she smiled and said, "Didn't you tell me to imagine the scene of the corpse being covered with tarot cards?" "Haha." Glaint awkwardly smiled and sighed. "I wonder which secret organization's member killed Lenevis. It really matches how I imagined such things to be like. It's so cool." "It's our tarot club," Audrey answered silently as she smiled. "Perhaps there's no organization, but the independent act of a powerful Beyonder? Regardless, I like this style. Urge Zio and Furs and ask them when they can find my apothecary formula," Glaint said in excitement. Audrey widened her eyes slightly. Looking around her, she lowered her voice and said, "Hush, keep it down. How can you talk about potions here?" Glaint gave an indifferent smile. "Don't worry. It's nothing. I had already confirmed that other than you and me, there's only a dog." The huge golden retriever Susie unconsciously shifted her position. Northborough and Backlund. Inside a room beneath the St. Samuel Cathedral, Daly, who was wearing a black hooded robe and makeup with blue eyeshadow and red blush, gave off a charming yet cold feeling. She randomly found a seat and picked up the document on the table. She swept through it before her gaze suddenly froze. Her brows immediately furrowed, and she suppressed something as she asked, "Lenevis? Why wasn't I informed of this matter? Why didn't you inform me about the operation last night?" Sitting at the seat of honor, Crestet Casimir, who had hidden his chin and lips back into his propped-up collar, said deeply, "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to control your emotions. That would have brought unnecessary danger to the operation, so I didn't get anyone to inform you. I can understand how you feel." A Nighthawk from the Tingen squad is currently undergoing guidance and training at the Holy Cathedral. He plans on joining the Red Gloves, and his performance is about equal to yours. But as the person in charge of the operation, and as a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks, I had to eliminate all unstable elements. Daly looked at the other Nighthawk squad captains and deacons and she sneered. "Why do you think I won't be able to control my own emotions? I'm very calm and I won't act rashly. My anger will only erupt after Lenevis is caught. This is the professional bearing of a veteran Nighthawk and a deacon. If I had caught Lenevis, I would let him know that men can be weak too. I would make sure that a cold, rotten, yet stiff corpse would be situated behind his buttocks. I would make sure that a pungent white bone filled with thorns would be situated in front of him. I'd make it so that those cold little fellows enter and leave his body wherever they can. Damn it! You actually managed to let him die just like that. Krastet Sesamir looked at Daly calmly and sighed after silently listening to her until she was done. How long have you been putting up with it? Daly froze, then muttered in frustration, like a deflated ball. For a very long time. Sesamir retracted his gaze and cast them towards the other deacons and captains. Got anything? From our preliminary investigations, the person who killed Lenivis is a member of the Secret Order, a Sequence 8 of the potion name Clown. He's adept at using paper cards as flying knives. A deacon reported based on the findings. However, we are unable to confirm this guess. The tarot cards scattered across the corpse don't seem like they were concealing something. After all, the Beyonder didn't deal with the cards on the wall and in Lenivis's head. We all believe the final scene was more of a ritual or a symbolism. Therefore, we suspect that the Beyonder might belong to an organization we don't understand. Of course, the scene might also just be a personal preference of his. Sesamir nodded slightly and said, "We can start from that point and proceed with a follow-up investigation. Ire, any updates on the person who tipped us off?" The charming middle-aged man, Ire Harson, flipped the papers in his hand and said, "We investigated the person and discovered that his actions were directed by a bounty hunter. In the process of looking for the wanted criminal Lenivis, the Balam's companion was killed by a member of the Aurora Order. In order to exact revenge, she secretly carried out an investigation and eventually locked onto the target at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balam Dock. Based on the target's actions and lifestyle, she discovered Lenivis. Her actions have basically been verified by witnesses. There isn't anything strange about it. We also use Beyonder means to confirm that she has no connection with the person who killed Lenivis. She's in hiding now, and it's very hard to find her." Sesamir added while seemingly in thought. This fits very well with Lenivis's description, that the radical and insane members of the Aurora Order were helping him out. Is there any problem with the reporter who did the interview at the Union that afternoon? Another captain of the Nighthawks reported. He was a fake reporter, and according to news from the police department, he's actually a private detective who had previously helped Mike Joseph of the Daily Observer. Joseph was investigating the murder of Sibber. We suspect that he got some kind of lead, found the Dock Union, and disguised himself to get in touch with everyone who was suspected of being the killer. This guess has already been confirmed by Isengard Stanton. Sesamir acknowledged it before switching to ask about other people who had recently come into contact with Lenivis, but similarly got answers that there was nothing wrong with them. Towards the end, he said after some deliberation, "I'm very confused by the lack of motive for the murder of Lenivis. That mysterious murderer deserves our attention. You should continue to follow up on this matter. In addition, according to common sense, the Aurora Order definitely wouldn't only have Beyonders at the Rose Bishop and Shadow Ascetic level in a big city like Backlund. There should at least be an oracle, or perhaps even a saint. Their ploy of receiving the true creator's descent has failed. With their crazy and irrational traits, I'm worried that they'll launch a series of retaliatory acts. All of you are to be on high alert in the near future. I'll also be staying in Backlund." "Yes, Your Grace," the deacons and captains replied solemnly. Krastet Sesamir paused for a few seconds before adding, "The events of the Megos incident in Tingen and last night's incident with Lenivis have revealed a problem. The industrial area, the dock area, and East Borough have become hotbeds for the descent and nurturing of evil gods. You are to send people to investigate and gather the truth about the situation. If it truly is as Lenivis had described, I'll raise this matter at the Council of Cardinals, formally exerting pressure on the kingdom and the government to bring about the corresponding changes as soon as possible." Klein slept in and didn't wake up until it was late. However, it still wasn't bright enough outside. The area was still shrouded in fog, making it dark and cold. "This doesn't fit with my splendid mood," he grumbled. After changing his clothes and taking his key, he returned to Minsk Street unnoticed. After changing from his worker's uniform to casual home attire, a shirt and sweater, and after confirming that no one came investigating his identity as a private detective, he was completely at ease. He leisurely went out to the butcher and grocery store to buy food in preparation for a sumptuous lunch for himself. There was some afternoon sun in Backland, and Klein lazily basked in its warmth, momentarily having no desire to do anything. He waited until 15 minutes to 3. Then he took out his golden pocket watch for a glance before returning to the bedroom and going above the gray fog. After conjuring the fake world and familiarizing himself with its controls, he sat down on the high-back chair at one end of the table and gave a message to the sun that he was to prepare for his participation in the gathering. At precisely 3, according to Backland time, streaks of crimson light soared out of the vast and ancient palace, outlining blurry figures which were equally indistinct. Audrey directly looked towards the seat of honor and said cheerfully, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The simple mission you entrusted has been completed." She had deliberately emphasized the word simple, in order to ascertain from Mr. Fool whether Lenivus had really been eliminated by his adorer. She wanted to know if the tarot card-covered death scene was a symbol of the tarot club. Klein deliberately acted composed as he said with a smile, "I'm already aware." After saying that, he sighed. In such an age, in such a place like Backland, in such a place in the East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district, they're the hotbeds for an evil god's descent. What? Alger was stunned for a moment, wondering if there was something wrong with his ears. Why would a simple mission involve hotbeds for an evil god's descent? Chapter 290. Affecting change indirectly. I remember that the simple mission given by Mr. Fool was for the sole purpose of examining 2 people for their candidacy of joining the gathering. The general idea was to find the person in the portrait, and that person was confirmed to be in Backland. Alger Wilson tried to remember what had happened the last gathering, and he couldn't understand what it had to do with the hotbed of an evil god's descent. Wasn't it just the search for someone? Furthermore, it was the kind of task which didn't pose much of a threat. Was there a deeper purpose behind Mr. Fool's simple mission? Was this a silent contest between deities? Many thoughts went through the hanged man's mind instantly, and he almost couldn't stop himself from asking justice, tempted to pay in order to understand what exactly was going on. However, as a veteran official beyonder, a seafarer who steered an ancient ghost ship, he was experienced and shrewd. He forcefully suppressed his impulse and planned to go through the internal channels of the Church of the Lord of Storms to find out about the recent events in Backland. As for Audrey, she instantly understood what Mr. Fool's sigh meant. She immediately understood the entire situation regarding Lenivus. So it turns out that the bit of godhood that Lenivus possessed was the basic foundation for the descent of the true creator into the real world. The harsh situation in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory area, however, was a hotbed that provided him rapid nurturing and strengthening. With a simple mission, Mr. Fool stopped the true creator's great conspiracy and saved the whole of Backland. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table, her eyes sparkling brightly. Unconsciously, she brimmed with admiration. At this moment, the gloomy and reserved world let out a chuckle and said, "Yes. Every time I see and hear about a large number of child laborers dying in their teens, and how most workers rarely live past 30, due to extreme exhaustion and the terrible environment, or how after barely surviving the previous tests, and as a result of their old age and the loss of their jobs, they can only wander the streets and die of hunger and cold, I have no doubt about the existence of an evil god. These gods are on the ground in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory area. Well, there's even been a report that some factory workers have a hard time surviving 5 years. In the East Borough of Backland, there's a saying that among the people who live there, without exception, any person who's a grandfather must be from the countryside. The meaning of this sentence is that people living there won't have a 3rd generation, as they can't have grandchildren. Poverty and hunger make their children very thin. Work that's difficult to adapt to causes them to quickly wither away in Backland, much less getting married and conceiving the next generation. This was the first time Audrey heard Mr. World speak so much. She was suddenly plunged into deep shock and confusion. Why don't I know anything about this? The newspapers and magazines I read only mention that the residents of East Borough are having a hard time. This is far worse than being laborious. Audrey's eyes lost their focus for a moment. She felt as if her understanding of the kingdom and the world had been completely overturned. Suddenly, she understood why Mr. Fool had uttered such a sigh, and why in such an age, such a backland, in such an East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district were the hotbeds of an evil god's descent. We can't go on like this. Otherwise, Backland will one day be destroyed because of this. Audrey felt a strong urge to go back and learn more, to remind her father Count Hall. She wanted to use the powers of a spectator and a telepathist to secretly guide the governmental policies that would improve the lives of the pitiful people in East Borough, the docks area, and the factory district. At the end of the long bronze table, Klein quietly observed Miss Justice's reaction. He had purposely lamented a while ago, and used his smuff, the world, to give a detailed explanation. He wanted this noble, one who still had a semblance of purity, to realize the seriousness of the problem, and use her to push for change in the kingdom. Before I become faceless, I must clearly remember that I cannot be personally involved in such matters. He silently set such a boundary for himself. Thank you, Mr. Fool. Thank you for saving Backland. Your sigh has made me understand the problem at its roots. Thank you, Mr. World. You have made me understand a great deal of the situation I didn't know in the past. Audrey held back her emotions and sincerely thanked the two gentlemen at the two ends of the table. Saved Backland. Alger was no stranger to the conditions of East Borough, the factory district, and the dock area. He was more surprised by the description Miss Justice had used. Just how huge was this matter? He thought with an extremely puzzled frown. The son, on the other hand, listened quite attentively, and although he couldn't understand all of it, he still listened attentively, hoping to learn more about the regions where Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and Mr. World were located. Klein only smiled in response to Miss Justice's gratitude, and didn't do anything further. He then turned to look at the Hanged Man. Alger immediately understood what he meant, and he quickly conjured the last page of the promised Roselle's diary. Klein received it out of thin air, and took a casual glance at it. January 14th. I discovered a problem. If unconscious high-sequence beyonder objects are not sealed, they would unconsciously attract nearby low-sequence beyonders from the same pathway, causing them to come into contact with each other. The higher the original sequence, the more likely that this will happen. However, this situation doesn't seem to be a constant. It seems to be intermittent. This diary entry immediately jolted Klein to attention, because he had made similar guesses before. After he came to Backland, he soon found himself intertwined with the secret order, with a beyonder of the seer pathway, and thus found himself in an extremely passive and extremely dangerous situation. However, he had also obtained the corresponding sequences 7, 6, and 5 potion formulas as a result. At the time, he had suspected that his transmigration involved secrets that gave him the power to resurrect, and that he would occasionally attract people and objects related to the seer pathway, such as the Antigonus family's notebook or members of the secret order. After seeing this diary entry of Emperor Roselle, Klein suddenly had a new idea. He used the corner of his eyes to scan the thick gray fog and the illusory dark red stars below him. He muttered to himself in silence. Could it be that the one who created that attractive force wasn't me, but this gray fog, the mysterious space above the gray fog? This could also be considered as a secret behind my transmigration. Without any further clues or information, Klein quickly gathered his thoughts and read the second diary entry. January 16th, the taste of a demonist still isn't bad. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, unsure of what expression he should show. Emperor, I have underestimated you. There's really nothing stopping you. Don't you care about the other person's previous gender? Don't you care about her experience during the pleasure phase? Suppressing the urge to exhale, Klein looked at the last entry in the diary in his hands. January 20th. I finished making the second card of blasphemy. Let me think. Where should I hide it? Yes, I plan to disguise it as a bookmark and insert it into a very valuable book. If the person who obtains it isn't someone fated, it would be hard to imagine that the most valuable thing in the book is actually that seemingly ordinary bookmark. Not bad, that's a good idea. Emperor, why can't you explain more clearly? Which book did the bookmark go into? Before I read this, I was so happy thinking that I can follow the clues and obtain a card of blasphemy, containing the profound secrets of the deities. Klein was disappointed, and let his gaze linger on the last paragraph. I hope that there will be more specific information in the future entries of the Emperor's diary. He comforted himself with this sentence, leaned back, and said with a smile, "You can start your discussion freely now." At that moment, the son Derek raised his hand, having learned it from Miss Justice, and said, "Mr. World, the Beyonder weapon you gave me far exceeds my expectations. I've already accumulated enough contribution points to trade for the ingredients to advance to Sequence 8. I'll use the remaining contribution points to hire helpers to obtain a chance to obtain the true root and juice of the Mist Treant. I'll be able to complete the deal soon." He explained in great detail, worried that his reputation of keeping his word would be suspected and destroyed. Of course, he was telling the truth. Although the axe didn't match some of his expectations for a Beyonder weapon, its power shocked him. That axe can create a powerful lightning bolt in just 2 or 3 strikes. And with the temporary boost from my bard's powers, I can easily fight in close quarters with the Sequence 7 monster. If I were to encounter a monster that's afraid of lightning, I could even easily finish it. I'm now a light suppliant with a certain level of magical spells. My strength has been raised qualitatively, and I can fight against even more powerful monsters. Derek Berg felt that he had fallen in love with that Beyonder weapon. In the City of Silver, its potency was one of the reasons to like it. The surrounding darkness and monsters in the depths of the darkness forced them to obey this rule for generations. All right. The gloomy world nodded under Klein's control. He then looked around and asked again, "Lady sirs, do you have any clues regarding the dark pattern Black Panther spinal fluid, or spring of the elves' marrow crystals?" Audrey shook her head without hesitation. After musing for a few seconds, Alger suddenly said, "There will be a grand event held on the Sonia Sea soon. Ships from the 4 pirate kings and the 6 pirate admirals will be participating. I should call them the 7 pirate admirals. Another person has joined the ranks. There'll definitely be transactions of Beyonder ingredients at such an event. It's very likely that the not very rare dark pattern Black Panther spinal fluid, or spring of the elves' marrow crystals will appear. I have the opportunity to participate in this event, but what can you offer in exchange? I'm sure you don't have the potion formula for Wind Blessed, and that it'll be very difficult for you to find it in the future too." Chapter 291. Seller and Notary in One High Probability of Appearing. Klein controlled the world and made him laugh deeply. "Yes, I really don't have the potion formula for Wind Blessed, nor will I have the means to obtain it anytime soon. However, I have an incomplete formula for a Sequence 4 potion. Even though it's incomplete, I think you should know its value very well. It can be exchanged for at least 10,000 gold pounds. And most of the time, you can't even buy it with money worth several times that. This is a crucial step that will lead to a human's qualitative change. So are you interested? The spinal fluid of a dark pattern Black Panther is worth between 500 and 700 pounds, and the spring of the elves' marrow crystals is between 300 and 400 pounds. I believe you'll still need to prepare an additional 9,000 pounds in cash, or an item of equal value." Klein had long since speculated that the sequence of the Sun sequence pathway Unshadowed could be swapped with the same sequence of the Sailor and Reader pathways, and this conjecture had been indirectly confirmed by Mr. A's request, and in the information provided in Roselle's diary. It was even suspected to extend to the secret suppliant and spectator sequence pathways. Therefore, he believed that the incomplete formula of Unshadowed was an irresistible temptation for the hanged man, who was from the Sailor pathway. It doesn't matter if you don't have something worth 9,000 pounds for the time being. You can pay it in installments with Mr. Fool bearing witness. Klein silently added, "Currently, He was lacking the spinal fluid of a dark patterned Black Panther. So he didn't mind letting the hanged man remain on credit. In any case, he didn't need to worry about the possibility of him running away. While there are also latent risks, I would be at a huge disadvantage if Mr. Hanged Man suddenly dies. With such an expensive deal at hand, Klein couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. The incomplete formula of a sequence 4 potion? An incomplete formula that leads to the path of a demigod? This is something that you can't even buy with money. Audrey's eyes lit up. She couldn't help hiding her curiosity as she asked before the hanged man could speak. Mr. World, can I ask which sequence 4 pathway the formula pertains to? If it's not convenient to tell me, pretend I never asked. Mr. World actually has a sequence 4 potion formula. Even if it's incomplete, it's still very shocking. No wonder Mr. Fool pulled him into the tarot club. He isn't a simple beyonder. Well, Zio's and Furz's test mission has come to an end. Mr. Fool didn't mention if he's letting them join. Well, he must have other considerations. And maybe he needs more time to observe them. I shouldn't take the initiative to ask since it will appear impolite. Many thoughts ran through Audrey's mind at that moment. Miss Justice's question was just what Klein wanted. He made the world reply in a husky voice. I was planning to say it anyway. It's the potion formula to sequence 4 of the Sun Pathway Unshadowed. The Sun Pathway? Derek instantly looked towards Mr. World, who sat at other end of the long bronze table, his eyes filled with sudden eagerness and longing. However, he maintained his silence because he knew that he was still far from the threshold of a demigod. He had to spend his limited resources to strengthen himself first. Only caring about the near future was the way the City of Silver operated. This was because, to its residents, there might not be any future at any moment. Unshadowed. Audrey nodded gracefully, then happily said, Thank you for your answer, Mr. World. She felt like she had learned something important again. Unshadowed. Alger muttered slowly before calmly replying, I'm sorry. I have no need for it. No need for it. Klein was taken aback. This was completely different from the script he had imagined. In his shock, he indirectly caused the world to pause, looking incredulous. It took quite a few seconds before he said, You can first owe a portion. With Mr. Fool as witness, I believe you'll definitely make up for the rest. No, I really have no need for it. Alger shook his head. No need for it. He really has no need for it. He's confident that he would gain the favor of the Church of the Lord of Storms and be bestowed with the corresponding potion directly? Or does he actually have the sequence 4 potion formula to the Sailor Pathway? The name was Cataclysmic Interror? Klein quickly thought of 2 possibilities. What should I do? Don't tell me that I should trade the Witch or Demoness of Pleasure formulas with him. Klein silently mocked himself, deliberately making the world silent for a few seconds before saying, Other potion formulas, or some secrets I know, such as secrets of the peak-level sequences. Alger changed his seating posture a little as he deliberated before answering. I personally know some secrets of peak-level sequences. How will you guarantee that there's no overlap? How will you guarantee that the secrets you will tell me is equal in value to the dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid and Spring of the Elves marrow crystals? We'll each give the peak-level sequence secret to Mr. Fool and let him decide if there's any overlap and determine their values. Mr. Fool, is that all right? Klein manipulated the world and asked himself this question. Then he said with a supercilious attitude, Sure. Alger slowly nodded. I have no problems with that. Let's begin. I really want to know the secret of the peak-level sequences, but I haven't had any extra money lately to buy it. Audrey looked enviously at the world and the hanged man as they each conjured a piece of goatskin parchment. Having never worried about money since she was young, she finally experienced the taste of poverty. Very soon, Klein received the content written by the 2 members. Without a doubt, he first looked at the goatskin parchment from the hanged man and discovered that the content was simple. There was only one sentence. The peak-level sequence conceals the path to divinity. Phew. Great. Otherwise, there would be a need to use other information for the exchange. Klein carefully examined the world's goatskin parchment before chuckling softly. It doesn't overlap. To most Beyonders, the secrets Mr. World is providing is of no value. But in the eyes of others, it's extremely important. This cannot be measured with money. Hearing this conclusion, Alger immediately fell into a dilemma. To him, getting 2 Beyonder ingredients at the same time wasn't a small burden. He had to sell many valuable items in order to trade for them. To pay such a price to hear a secret that might not be very useful to him? Alger considered it for nearly 20 seconds before saying, "Mr. Fool, can you provide more hints? I can't make a decision yet." Can't make a decision? The corner of Klein's mouth moved slightly. He knew that the words he had said to maintain his image had the opposite effect, and had been ineffective. He hesitated for a moment and then smiled. The content he describes is a detailed supplement to the secret you know. Detailed supplement? A detailed supplement to the path to divinity? Alger didn't hesitate any longer. He turned his head to look at the world and said in a terse and firm voice, "Deal." Then, he immediately added, "I'll help you exchange for the spinal fluid of a dark pattern black panther, and the spring of the elves' marrow crystals within the week. Of course, the premise is that they'll appear at the pirates' meet. Although the probability is very high, we still have to believe that anything could happen. If that happens, I might have to postpone it to next week, the following week, or even the next month. But don't worry, I will keep my promise." "No problem. With Mr. Fool as witness, there's no need for me to worry," the world answered hoarsely. After they had confirmed the transaction, Klein conjured a goatskin parchment in front of the hanged man. Alger lowered his head eagerly, reading through each word voraciously. "There is a sequence 0 above sequence 1. And sequence 0 is the sequence of a true god. They can similarly be reached through the corresponding potions and rituals." Sequence 0? The sequence of the true god. Alger was astonished and shocked at first, but soon he felt relieved, and then he murmured to himself in delight, "I see. I understand what it means." He inhaled silently, and leaned back in his chair as if nothing had happened. That secret must be astonishing. Mr. Hanged Man even lost his composure. Audrey looked away with a longing expression, and said to the son who was diagonally opposite her, "Mr. Son, I remember you mentioning that the City of Silver has the Dragon Pathways Sequence 9, 8, and 7 potion formulas?" "Yes." Derek nodded honestly. "Sequence 7's potion formula is Psyche Analyst. If I wish to get it, what is the price I need to pay?" Audrey asked in a reserved manner. "The Sequence 7 potion formula of the Sun Pathway," Derek replied without any hesitation. Audrey nodded gently and said, "I'll do my best to obtain it." Zio and Furs mentioned before that there's a Beyonder of the Sun Pathway at Mr. A's gathering. He's at least Sequence 7, and is adept at purification and exorcism. Once all the recent events settle down, I can attempt to get it from him. In addition, I should join more of the gatherings at the abandoned education building in that hospital. I should try to come into contact with members of the psychology alchemists. One of the two paths will definitely lead to something. Thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind, but she suddenly realized that she was unable to obtain it even if she discovered clues to the formula. This was because she would be experiencing a financial crisis for the next few months, and was barely holding on. The price of a Sequence 7 formula is around £800, so if I scrimp, I should be able to produce that. It's already October, it's almost New Year's. I'll be an adult then, and I'll have the freedom to handle a lot more of my money. Or should I use the knowledge I was taught by Mr. Fool to trade? I wonder what attitude he has towards this kind of behavior. Audrey's thoughts gradually dispersed. She decided to wait until there was hope for the formula, before she asked Mr. Fool. The transaction segment came to an end. Klein originally wanted to use the knowledge he knew to exchange for a mystical item without many negative effects. But after sensing how tight the hanged man was, he knew that the other party would pay a large price for those 2 Beyonder ingredients. It was unlikely that he had any extra assets, so he could only give up in regret. As soon as the free exchange segment began, Alger took the initiative to mention Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalengo's ship and crew was subdued, giving rise to a new pirate admiral. Chapter 292. Exchanging news. Audrey was interested in the pirate admiral and asked, "What's his name? What was his current title?" "There hasn't been any related news in Backland." Alger nodded slowly. "She's a lady and was a famous pirate in the past. You should have heard of Ailment Girl Tracy, right?" "No, I don't know much about such things." Audrey shook her head in honesty. "Me too." Sitting at the end of the table, Klein added inwardly. Alger fell silent for 2 seconds, and without wasting any time explaining, he said, "In short, she subdued the crew of Kalangos's crew last month. She proved herself with actual action that she had the strength of a pirate admiral. She changed the name of Kalangos's ship to Black Death and calls herself Rear Admiral Ailment. In the past, she acted independently and was someone who specialized in curses, black flames, and ice. Her enemies would always suffer from sudden ailments of various kinds. At present, no one knows which pathway she belongs to, but they're certain that she's at sequence 5. Audrey listened with relish. She blinked her eyes and requested curiously, "Mr. Hanged Man, can you introduce the 4 pirate kings and the other 6 pirate admirals in detail? I've only heard of their names and titles, but I don't know what beyonder powers they are equipped with." Alger looked around and saw that both the sun and the world were showing signs of attentiveness. He nodded slightly and said, "That wouldn't be an issue. The strongest pirate king is the king of the 5 seas, Nast. He claims to be a descendant of the 4th epic Solomon Empire. Not only is he a high-sequence beyonder, but he possesses the terrifying ghost ship Dark Emperor, a relic of the Empire. He's adept at using order. He can pull his enemy into combat, in a domain that he's best at, and create fascinating effects. He's also the oldest pirate in the world. Rumor has it that he's over 100 years old, and he has been active in the 5 seas since the Roselle era. No one knows exactly how old he is. Of course, compared to the other pirate kings, there's a lot of information about him. As for the owner of Dawn, all we know is that she's a beautiful woman. She was once a warlock and is now a demigod. She calls herself Queen Mystery." After introducing the 4 kings, Alger changed the topic to the 6 remaining pirate admirals. The owner of the Black Tulip, Bloodwell, was once a subordinate of the king of the 5 seas. Later, he became independent and calls himself Admiral Hell. Rumor has it that he's established certain connections with the numinous episcopate. He's a powerful medium and can control all sorts of creatures in the spirit world. He's terrifying and odd. Rumor has it that he possesses a ring left behind from the ancient era's death. Admiral of Stars Catlia was once a follower of Queen Mystery, but they've long become estranged. The reason for that, according to rumors, is because she joined a particular secret organization, angering Queen Mystery. And according to the information I know, this secret organization is the Moses Ascetic Order. The Moses Ascetic Order, the Mystery Prior Pathway, the Hidden Sage. Klein suddenly thought of old Neil's loss of control, and the evil god, who would whisper temptations into the ears of low-sequence beyonders of the same sequence. This was the first time he learned news regarding the Moses Ascetic Order, through reality instead of books. Then, Alger introduced Admiral of Blood Seigneur, who was suspected to be non-human, Rear Admiral Deep Sea Hell Constantine, who possessed a bloodline that was partially from sea monsters, Rear Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards, and Rear Admiral Dusk Bulatov Yoan. "Thank you so much for sharing. I'm beginning to yearn for the sea," Audrey said, filled with longing. "I don't know when I'll be able to truly travel." "No, Miss Justice, it's absolutely not as nice as you imagine. From my point of view, it's an amalgamation of blood, chaos, murder, desire, and horror." Alger calmly doused her enthusiasm. Audrey nodded and switched topics. "There have been 11 serial murders in Backland recently, but one of them has been proven to be a copycat crime. The serial killings are against women who were street girls, but are now working normal professions. The murderer cuts open their stomachs and removes all of their internal organs. This sounds like something to do with devil worship. Was it done by someone from the Blood Sanctify sect?" Alger instantly made a guess. "I don't know. The murderer hasn't been found yet." Audrey yearned to become a detective, bringing Susie along and capturing that cursed murderer. At this moment, Derek blurted out in a daze, "I know about such rituals." He knows. That's right. Before the cataclysm, especially during the Second Epoch, devils were active in the real world, where they lived on the ground. They were the object of hatred for both giants and dragons. It's normal for the City of Silver to have relevant records. Their history hasn't been tampered with, nor has there been any blanks over the generations. Klein looked thoughtfully at the son, waiting for him to say more. "You know about this?" Audrey asked in joy. Derek nodded. "It's mentioned in our devil studies. It's rather ancient. The devils use it as a ritual to supplement their advancement, typically used when advancing from sequence 6 to sequence 5. It's not a ceremony to please the devil, but a ceremony for the devil to assist them in advancing?" Audrey asked in surprise. Derek replied very seriously, "That's right. The Abyss Pathway's sequence 6 is called Devil. This is also the origin of that race's name." The Abyss Pathway? Before the Cataclysm, the Devil Pathway was called the Abyss Pathway, and Devil is only the name of sequence 6. Could sequence 0 be Abyss? Again, Klein discovered the value of the sun. A lot of knowledge and mysteries were lost across the river of history, but the City of Silver still possessed them. "Is that so?" Audrey nodded indiscernibly. "Mr. Sun, are you aware of the actual details of the ritual?" Derek nodded and said, "The minimum requirement is 13 and the highest is 49. The more complete the ritual, the higher the chance of advancement. Between two murders, there must be a minimum of 3 days. Otherwise, it would be easy to lose control, but the interval will also not exceed 9 days. That will cause the ritual to be reset. Every time a murder occurs and after every partial ritual, the devil will eat the victim's organs. From this point on, he'll be in a violent and bloodthirsty state, wishing to harm others until that desire is satisfied once again." "That's really scary." Audrey sighed from the bottom of her heart, feeling that she couldn't even bear to imagine it. Klein sat in the thick gray fog, quietly listening and remembering. After discussing the case of the serial killer, Audrey looked at Alger and organized her words. "Mr. Hanged Man, there's something that I've been wondering about. I've attended several Beyonder gatherings and find that very few people sell potion formulas. Even if there is one, it would be very difficult for the transaction to close. Why is this?" Alger chuckled and said, "That's because a potion formula is easy to fake, and Beyonder gatherings are relatively hidden and not too binding. Therefore, no one dares to risk their lives. Are you going to prepare 2 sets of Beyonder ingredients and conduct an experiment with animals first? That price is too high." Audrey suddenly felt a little guilty. Moreover, that's not the only extra cost. Animals can lose control more easily than humans after taking potions. You have to hire a few Beyonders to protect you to prevent you from dying during your experiments. So for most Beyonders, even if a formula appears, they wouldn't dare buy it, Alger added. Audrey felt even guiltier. Alger didn't notice her reaction and continued. "Because of this, unless the host or a member of the gathering has the ability to appraise the authenticity of the potion formula, and has already won the trust of most members, it's difficult for a formula trade to close. Well, the old Mr. Eye of Wisdom can. Mr. A is a shepherd, so he should be able to." Klein leaned back in his chair and muttered something to himself in silence. A thought flashed through Audrey's mind as she asked, "Can't it be done by making an oath?" "Honorable lady, this is an underground gathering. Do you think it's suitable to make an oath in the name of one of the 7 orthodox gods? This isn't something that can be resolved with an oath. A corresponding ritual is needed." Alger chuckled. "As for other evil gods or devils and mysterious existences like the hidden sage and the true creator, unless you're their believers, who would dare to swear an oath in their name? Wouldn't they be wishing death upon themselves?" At this point he sighed. In addition, without them knowing the acting method, potions easily lead to a loss of control, easily turning people into monsters. Furthermore, the corresponding ingredients are hard to obtain and rather expensive. Therefore, as long as the 7 churches don't allow such trades to be officially recognized, there's no need for them to deliberately control the spread of potion formulas on a wide scale, much less talk about advancement. So that's how it is, Audrey murmured to herself, clearing a huge question in her mind. No wonder. Klein suddenly came to a realization. 7 Orthodox gods. Derek really wanted to ask which 7 they were, but he ultimately held himself back. He thought for a moment and said, "The City of Silver has recently organized an expedition to explore deep into the darkness and found a semi-destroyed temple. The statue that's worshipped inside was a naked man nailed upside down on a cross. There were also a lot of bloodstains on its surface. Do you know which god that is? This is the true creator. The forsaken land of the gods actually has a temple of the true creator. Judging from what the sun said, the true creator shouldn't exist before the cataclysm. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the City of Silver to not recognize it." Klein used his clown ability to control his expression to prevent the shock from showing on his face. Justice, the hanged man, and the world exchanged looks, shook their heads and said in unison, "We don't know." Just as they finished speaking, they heard Mr. Fool in the gray fog say in a deep voice, "That's the fallen creator." Chapter 293. Derek's worry. The fallen creator? Derek frowned immediately. The residents of the City of Silver had always believed in the omnipotent and omniscient God, the Lord that created everything. Therefore, when he heard a similar name with the word fallen tagged to it, he couldn't help but instinctively reject and feel uncomfortable about the notion. Fallen creator. That's the way Mr. Fool addresses the true creator. So that's the image of this evil god. But why would his statue and temple appear within the City of Silver's exploration confines? That place is suspected to be the forsaken land of the gods. Or perhaps, before it was abandoned by the gods, there was already the faith of the true creator. Could the holy residence that the Aurora Order always talks about be the forsaken land of the gods? Many thoughts came to Alger, but he couldn't make an accurate judgment because the history before the cataclysm had long evolved into myths and legends. It couldn't simply be described as information shrouded in fog. He thought for 2 seconds and deliberately said, "We have another name for the fallen creator. It's the true creator. The faction that believes in him is in control of the Beyonder pathways, such as the Secret Suppliant, Listener, and Shadow Ascetic. The subsequent sequence includes the shepherd you mentioned before." Shepherd? The silent Derek sat up straight, his eyes filled with horror. He wasn't unfamiliar with the Beyonder pathways, which the hanged man had referred to, other than some of the sequences being described with similar words in the City of Silver. For instance, the Whispered and Listener. So that strange and evil statue represents the Secret Suppliant pathway. Elder Lovia is already a shepherd. She's been acting more and more strangely. Derek suddenly started to worry about the 6-member council's newly advanced elder and the safety of the City of Silver. In the past, when they explored the surrounding areas, the City of Silver had found a few cities that were completely destroyed. In those places, only a few pieces of rubble had been carved with words that proved the existence of such a civilization. These words were all variations of Dragonese, Jotun, and Elvish, and most of them repetitively described one kind of existence. That existence was called Evil God. The residents of the City of Silver, who was involved in the expedition, were guessing that those cities were destroyed by evil gods. So after finding out that Elder Lovia's pathway was probably controlled by an evil god, how could Derek not be shocked, worried, and terrified? He returned to his taciturn state, disappointing Audrey, who had been waiting to hear more stories about the City of Silver. After so many gatherings, after her purchase of the dragon race's intelligence, her interest towards the City of Silver had grown even more. His reaction is a little different from what I expected, Alger observed calmly for a while, but he failed to gain anything from it. For a moment, he couldn't find a point of entry into the conversation. And if he asked directly, he suspected that the son would request payment, which wasn't an easy task for him, since he was burdened with the debt of 2 Beyonder ingredients. It was at this moment that they simultaneously heard the sound of the table being tapped gently. Klein concealed his fatigue with the thick gray fog, and said with a chuckle, "Let's end today's gathering here. Your will is our will." Audrey immediately stood up and curtsied with her illusory skirt. The hanged man, the sun, and the world successively replied with similar words. Klein waved his hand and severed the connection, quietly watching the blurry shadows of Miss Justice and the others disappear into thin air. Then he made his smuff the world disappear. Then, he picked up the small badge which he had obtained from Lenivis and studied it. You can join if you have this item. Klein read the sentence on the back of the badge, but realized that it didn't undergo any changes. He thought for a moment and carefully injected spirituality into it. A layer of faint light bloomed and quickly condensed into a light beam, shooting out of the gray fog. However, it was repelled by the endless gray fog. The beam of light suddenly dispersed, transforming into a palm-sized piece of illusory goatskin parchment. On it was written in ancient Fasak, January 4, 1358 p.m., in Babur Valley. A simple communication device in the field of mysticism? It sends out messages, requests synchronization, and gets the latest rendezvous time and venue? Klein recalled the scene he had just seen and made a preliminary judgment on the use of the badge. 1350, that's next year. The Babur Valley lies in the area before the Tussock River enters Backlund. The time is precise, but the venue is vague. It's a valley that's almost 100 kilometers long. Perhaps this badge can be used as a location tool when one gets there. Klein turned the badge over and over, with interest, trying to figure out the corresponding symbols, incantations, and characteristics, to see if he could copy one himself. Unfortunately, since he was no longer part of the Nighthawks, his knowledge in mysticism was still at the same level as before. He had no opportunities of improving it further. Therefore, after studying it for a few minutes, he could only helplessly give up. As for the phrase, "You can join if you have this item," Klein's plan was to not consider it for the time being. If I can become a faceless by the end of this year, then I can head there in disguise. Otherwise, forget it, Klein silently said to himself. Then he turned his attention to the matter of advancing to magician. The true root and juice of the mist treant is likely in the bag, with the sun. If my luck isn't too bad, I should be able to get the spinal fluid of a dark patterned Black Panther this week. Sequence 7, a mid-sequence. I can already see and touch it. How should a magician act? As he thought about it, Klein began to consider specific issues. Due to his experiences before and after his death and resurrection, he instantly comprehended the true essence of clown. Therefore, in this month or so, he only needed constant acting in his daily life to gradually digest it. He didn't need to make further summaries, and adjusted according to the feedback. After killing Lenivis and attaining his initial revenge, the clown potion was completely digested the moment he was laughing amid tears. This wasn't the same as the process in which Klein first digested the seer potion. It was considered a special case. And now he had to return to such a situation with the magician's acting. The true essence of magician, to pass off the illusory with the genuine? According to what Zeradal said in the Emperor's diary, although the main focus of this pathway isn't fate, a portion of it still belongs to it. So there must be something corresponding to it. For example, it might seem that fate can be changed to a certain extent, but in the end, it turns out to all be an illusion. It's just a magic trick that fools you? Klein rubbed his temples, then wrapped his remnant spirituality around himself, and descended into the gray fog. St. George's Borough, in a 2-bedroom apartment. Fortunately, I prepared another place like this. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know where to hide. Fur stared into the mirror and removed her dropping hair. That's right, Zio replied weakly, lying in bed. I just read in the newspaper that Lenivis is dead, but this matter involves godhood, so it won't end so soon. We have to hide for a while. No, it's you who's going to hide, not me. I'm an upright clinical doctor, the author of a bestseller. Furs looked at herself in the mirror and began putting on simple makeup. Zio couldn't provide a rebuttal as she slowly sat up and said, "Thankfully, I was sufficiently clever and possess rich experience. When I got someone to make the report, I didn't directly say that it involved the godhood of the true creator. I only described it as seemingly very dangerous, and that the target had experienced huge changes like he was praying to evil gods. If not, I wouldn't even dare to stay in Backland. To be embroiled in high-level battles sure is troublesome and dangerous. I don't want to take on any more of Miss Audrey's missions again. Really? Furs asked without looking back. Zio fell silent for a few seconds and said, Actually, there was no need for us to mention the godhood. Since Miss Audrey was able to discover this on her side, the Church of the Goddess would definitely be capable of doing so. They've most likely killed Giant, right? I can't be sure, Furs replied without mincing her words. Zio froze, then let out a long, slow sigh. Furs stopped what she was doing, turned her head to look at her, and said, This mission was basically completed by you, so I won't be sharing the payment with you. There's a total of £200, so with the £70 you've saved up, even if you deduct the expenses, you should be close to obtaining the first Beyonder ingredient for the sheriff potion. But I wouldn't be able to receive the £100 from the police so quickly. Zio pursed her lips. This wasn't to say that the police wasn't willing to give the bounty money, but that she couldn't take it directly. She had to go through the friend who had helped her deliver the clues. That was the official bounty recipient. Since she believed that this matter would definitely cause a huge ruckus, she didn't have the guts to find her friend anytime soon. As for whether that friend would usurp the bounty, she was quite confident. The other party had helped too many shady bounty hunters before. It was fine to take a commission, but if he dared to directly usurp all of the bounty money, he would have already died in some unknown dark alley. But it will ultimately belong to you. Furs paused for 2 seconds and seriously asked, When you've collected enough money, will you contact the masked guy and work for him, so that you can purchase the corresponding ingredients from him? No, unless I can't get it anywhere else and that there's no hope. Zio gave her answer. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall, Audrey was still reminiscing over today's gathering when she suddenly saw her personal maid, Annie, coming over with a piece of paper. Miss, here's your telegram. Annie smiled and said, It's from the east coast of Balam. Alfred's? Audrey happily received it and read it carefully. Dear sister, the rainbow salamander that you asked for has arrived at Pritz Harbor last night. My orders are to deliver it to your manor in the suburbs. Arrived last night? Then it'll be delivered to my manor as early as today, and by the latest, tomorrow. Audrey tilted her head to the side and looked at Susie, who was fighting with her snacks. With a shallow smile she said, Susie, the gift I prepared for you is almost here. Woof. Susie looked at her mistress in confusion. Chapter 294. Admiral of Stars Ring. Ring. Klein circled the lawn behind Leopard's house a few times on the bicycle the inventor had just completed. It's not bad. It's just as I expected, but there's no need to make a lone standing bell. The cyclists won't be able to free a hand when they encounter a situation. You can combine the bell to the handle. This will make it simpler and more adequate for situational developments. Klein's right hand clasped the brake tight, slowing the bike down to a stop. Meanwhile, he placed the bell in his left hand back to its original spot. Leopard thought for a moment. Yes, that's right. I was simply imitating the ringing bells of the carriages, and forgot that this is a brand new mode of transportation. At this point, he looked at Klein, who was getting off the bike with great familiarity, as he placed it on a rack. You give me the feeling that you've ridden a similar type of transportation tool before, and you rode it very well. I'm sure all the other bikes on the market are very flawed, and very different from my bike. Sir, do you have time to learn more about bicycle sharing systems? As a clown, I should actually be able to ride a unicycle. Klein silently lampooned before smiling. This has nothing to do with experience. The key is outstanding balance and exercise. He quickly changed the subject. But based on your introduction just now, the production cost is quite high, and it's quite at odds with our product's market segment. You have to come up with a plan as soon as possible to reduce the cost. And you have to understand that nobles, magnates, and other people of the high classes of society will definitely not choose to ride their own bicycles. It would be disgraceful. And the same goes for the middle class with an annual income of £300 or higher. Our target audience are clerks, postmen, so-called working-class aristocrats, and people who earn between 70 to 300 pounds a year. This is just a prototype, yet a term invented by Emperor Roselle. It's normal to have a high cost. If the subsequent industrialization is successful, I believe it wouldn't be a problem to lower it to 6 pounds. If we can find a cheap replacement material for natural rubber, it'll be even better. That's the most expensive component. Leopard had long considered this problem as he replied. Unfortunately, no crude oil has been found in this world yet. I wonder if it actually exists or not. Can refined coal tar be a replacement in this aspect? I don't know about this at all. I'm neither a student of this profession nor a savant. Klein thought for a moment and said, if the cost can be kept below 4 pounds, we'll be rich. As for the cheap material used to replace natural rubber, you can go through Roselle's manuscript. Maybe he has some ideas. Yeah, Leopard said before he suddenly added. Speaking of which, I just remembered that there will be an Emperor Roselle Memorial Exhibition at the Royal Museum next week. It's organized by the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Rumor has it that there will be the original blueprints of Emperor Roselle's inventions, and all kinds of relics. The original invention blueprints and all kinds of relics? Klein's heart skipped a beat, impressed. When is it exactly? I'm very interested. From next Tuesday to next Friday. Every day from 9 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon. Although Emperor Roselle was once the enemy of the kingdom, the allure of his legendary life hasn't declined because of this. I'll take some time out of my schedule to visit the exhibition. Klein fished out his bulging wallet and took out 2 10-pound and 2 5-pound notes. Here's the second payment. Use it to study how to cut costs and make the most perfect application at the patent office. If you don't have a lawyer, you know, I can introduce one, and the last 20 pounds will be given to you next week to find new investors and complete the industrialization of the product. Of course, I'll also help you get in touch with people who are interested. He had never thought of monopolizing the profits of a bicycle. First, he lacked the money for mass production, and second, he believed that he lacked the social connections needed for industrialization, promotion, and sales. He could barely do it himself or hire people to do it. It was hard work with no guarantee of success. It was even possible that he might make a loss. In that case, it would be better to bring in new investors with relevant resources and channels, and let the professionals handle the professional work. More importantly, he would then have the opportunity to cash out a certain amount of shares in advance, accumulating the resources and cash that he needed to advance to Faceless. He wanted to avoid running into a situation where he encountered the ingredients, but lacked the money to buy them. Besides, I have no intention to be a bicycle tycoon. My identity is sensitive. I should stay away from things that might draw society's attention towards me before I become a Faceless. I'm acting as a magician, not a businessman or a factory owner. Klein sighed in his heart. I know several lawyers, Leopard muttered, and received the second round of investment funds. Why don't you go to the bank and apply for a loan? When we get the patent, I'm sure that a bank will loan us money, like the Backlund Bank or Varvat Bank. We're not just bringing in investors but resourceful channels, connections, and skills. Do you understand? Klein explained with a smile. He then put on his hat and said, when you've applied for a patent, send me a letter. You know my address. On the Sonia Sea stood an island with an extinct volcano. One by one, ships with masts and sails approached the shore, crowding up the reasonably sizable wharf. The sound of the pirates singing, shouting, laughing, cursing, and cheering filled the air, turning the place into a sea of revelry. The hanged man, Alger Wilson, stepped off the Blue Avenger and climbed a cliff not far away, and watched all of this in silence. With the exception of the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals, the rest of the pirates only received the news of the event a week ago. Most of them won't be able to arrive in time, as this will prevent the navies of the different countries and the powerful beyonders from the various churches to launch an assault. Alger watched the pirates carrying out buckets of ale without his attention on them. He knew that the Lone Kingdom already had a new generation of ironclad warships, but he wasn't worried about meeting one here. This was because only 4 months had passed, and the advertised invincible fleet still needed more ironclad warships and different types of ships for support, as well as the time to train military officers, sailors, and gunners. There was no way they could create a combat force without a year's time. Even as Alger's thoughts drifted away, the pirates on the ships and wharf suddenly cried out in alarm. Some ran deep into the islands. Some hurriedly steered their ships away from the wharf, as if they were running from devils and the plague. In just a few minutes, the bustling scene from before was reduced to a desolate mess and silence. Alger turned his head to look at the sea, and saw a ship painted black, with a huge white flag with a skull hanging from its mast. The skull was pitch black, and its eye sockets burned with a ghostly blue flame. Black Death, Alger whispered. He understood why the pirates had scurried off. Wherever Rear Admiral Ailment Tracy passed, she would leave a wake of people who got sick for no reason. Black Death approached the shore slowly, as a figure wearing a white linen shirt and dark red coat appeared at the ship's bow. The figure was quite a beautiful lady, and she also exuded a heroic vibe. Her beautiful black hair was coiled up high, and she had a white scarf wrapped around her head. She wore beige pants and had a tall and slender figure, and it had no lack of elegance. What attracted the most attention was the woman's long, straight eyebrows and the sharp, bright blue eyes. As she looked around, her eyes would occasionally lose focus, making her look adrift and exceptionally alluring. A wandering poet who had mixed himself with the pirates had arrived at the edge of the cliff at some point. He began reciting, "She will always be a girl. She indeed brings ailments. Oh, I'm sick. My mind is full of her." A number of pirates who left gathered once again as they looked at Ailment Maiden Tracy mesmerized. Alger held back his feelings of contempt as he glanced at the pirates and scoffed inwardly. Truly a bunch of fellows with no future or will. All they knew was hide moments ago, but now they've become seduced by her beauty. Although Ailment Maiden is indeed very beautiful, it's not to the extent that it will cause them to act this way. Oh, a beyonder power related to allurement? As his mind was whirling, Rear Admiral Ailment Tracy left Black Death and began walking to the Black Palace deep within the island. At that moment, a huge sailboat appeared on the sea. Its flag depicted an eyelashless eye with 10 stars surrounding it. Admiral of Stars Catlia. Alger nodded gently and muttered silently. Since the Black Death and the other ships were already docked at the wharf, the huge ship didn't approach the shore. Instead, it went around to the sheltered cliff and anchored. Soon after, the gloomy sky suddenly lit up, and bits of stellar radiance sprinkled down, condensing in the air to form a transparent long bridge. It led from the giant sailboat to the palace. A woman stepped onto the long bridge and began strolling through the air. She wore a black classical robe with numerous symbols and magic characteristics inscribed on it. The most obvious one was a mysterious eye with no eyelashes. Hanging on this woman's waist, there was a celestial globe and a short scepter. She resembled powerful warlocks who were active in the fourth epoch according to folklore. Alger looked up and frowned slightly as he muttered in puzzlement, "That celestial globe looks familiar. It's like the strange glass bottle I previously obtained, the one I had no idea how to use. It eventually shattered after Mr. Fool pulled me into the gathering." On the outskirts of Empress Borough, Audrey led her maids and the huge golden retriever, Susie, into her own manor. "Miss, the delivery from Inmat Harbor is just ahead," the butler in charge of the manor said in a respectful tone. "All right." Audrey nodded lightly and said half-jokingly to the large golden retriever beside her, "Susie, this is your present." As they spoke, they turned a corner and saw the so-called gift. It was a giant lizard whose skin changed color, depending on how the light hit it. It was 3 meters long, and its height reached Audrey's knees even with it laying on the ground. They were 2 colossal creatures, enormous enough to frighten a child. Woof! She turned her head to look at her mistress, and saw that her expression was exactly the same as hers. Apparently, she hadn't expected the gift to be so exaggerated. Chapter 295. All ingredients gathered. Audrey had always had a subconscious understanding that a rainbow salamander equals the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland equals the size of one's palm. To her, It would be something soft with grooves, a beyonder ingredient which constantly changed in color. So what did that have to do with the 3-meter-long colossus in front of her? For a moment she was confused, but when she heard Susie's yelp, she snapped to her senses. She pretended to be satisfied with the result and said to the butler, "This is exactly the animal specimen I need. It's just a little bigger than I thought, just a little. Take the servants and move them to the warehouse. I'll study it when I'm free." "Yes, miss." Then, the butler immediately instructed the nearby male servants who were furtively looking at their mistress. Audrey looked around and, without another word, led Susie into the manor's study. Using the excuse that she had to focus on writing a return letter to her brother, she made all the maids she had brought stay outside. After the dissection is done, there will be 2 sets of rainbow salamander pituitary glands. A portion can be used to exchange for a Farsman rabbit, just enough to concoct a bottle of the telepathist potion. Audrey gradually recovered from her astonishment and confusion as she began to think about Susie's advancement. At that moment, she thought of a serious problem. She had no idea if Susie had digested the potion or not. If it hasn't been completely digested, consuming the telepathist potion would easily lead to a loss of control. She isn't like a human who can endure through it. Wait, how did she endure it the first time? Besides, her current intelligence is about that of a 10-year-old child's. She's already learning words in the loan language, and she said she wishes to read newspapers and magazines, as well as books. Audrey fell silent for a few seconds. She glanced at the confused, large golden retriever that sat beside her. "Susie, have you completely digested the potion?" "Digest?" Susie returned with clear articulation, expressing her puzzlement. Audrey had already told her that what she had taken was a potion, and she had warned her not to tell anyone, and not to tell any intelligent animals that could bark or meow. Audrey nodded her head slowly and heavily. "It's a very strange and unique feeling. It feels like something illusory inside your body breaks down and fuses with your mind. You will vaguely see illusory stars one after another, and you will be one of them. These stars will attract each other, in a bid to fuse as one." Susie quietly listened to everything, then replied with a light and brisk voice, "Then I should have completely digested it. I've had a similar feeling before." "Ah, Susie has completely digested the spectator potion? But no one taught her the acting method." "At most, I would occasionally remind her to observe more and remain calm." Audrey asked in astonishment, "When did you digest it?" "Last month, the month before last, or perhaps even earlier." Susie tried her best to recall when. Seeing that her mistress's expression was getting odder and odder, she hurriedly wagged her tail and timidly added, "I don't remember. I'm just a dog. I won't purposely remember such things." "Woof. Just a dog. But you were only a little slower at digesting than me. Don't tell me that when I interact with other beyonders. I'll say that when it comes to digesting potions, I'm a little better than a dog." "Pooey. Audrey, what are you thinking?" Audrey maintained her elegant smile and politely praised, "Very good, I mean on this matter regarding the digestion of the potion. You did very well." Returning from Leopard's Place, Klein took a leisurely afternoon nap. But it wasn't long before he was awakened by illusory, disconcerting cries. "Mail. Is it Mr. Hanged Man or Little Son? Is one of the final main ingredients for my potion ready?" Klein carefully tried distinguishing who for a few seconds and soon forgot about his anger from being awakened. He quickly got up, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. He noticed that the crimson star that symbolized the Hanged Man was contracting and expanding. Hence, he stretched out his hand, spreading his spirituality before touching it. After the usual honorary names of the Fool, the Hanged Man prayed, "I've already gathered the dark pattern Black Panther spinal fluid and the spring of the Elves' marrow crystals. Please permit me to hold a sacrificial ritual and seek your help in handing it to Mr. World." That's pretty fast. The Hanged Man had said that there would be a grand event among the pirates soon. It seems like it's not soon, but now. He always holds back when speaking, never fully speaking the truth. Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, "Sure." After a simple sacrificial ritual, Alger resisted his urge to ask Mr. Fool if the celestial globe on Admiral of Stars Catlia had anything to do with him. At this moment, Klein had already forgotten about him and was admiring the two Beyonder ingredients on the surface of the long bronze table. The dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid was a seemingly translucent liquid, but if one looked carefully, they would discover that its clarity was also divided into different levels. The lower one went, the more transparent they were at distinct levels. It fully satisfied someone with an obsessive-compulsive disorder. The spring of the elf's marrow crystals was similar to a faded egg. Its shell was very thin, and it looked like it could easily shatter at a touch. Even without shaking, one could still hear the sound of swishing water inside. I should be able to get 300 pounds and a formula clue. My magician is only short of the true root and juice of the mist treant. I wonder when Little Sun will complete the mission. Klein waited in anticipation. As for the other supplementary ingredients, he had already bought them at various stores. For example, the droplet gem he needed to buy was purchased from a jewelry store, and he had ground it into powder. 5 grams was about 5 pounds. The son, Derek, didn't keep Klein waiting long, and on Wednesday evening, he whispered a prayer to the fool that he had prepared the true root and juice of the mist treant, and asked him to pass them on to the world. The mist treant's true root was heart-shaped, brown, palm-sized, and wrinkled. It looked like an old man's skin, but its back was as smooth and exquisite as a gem. It was slightly expanding and contracting, as though it had a certain amount of vitality. Its juice was light green and sparkling, making it look very delicious. Klein just looked at them, feeling a little smug. In the present day and age, Sequence 7 was the threshold of a mid-sequence Beyonder. This meant that a Beyonder would finally be able to bid farewell to the state of being only slightly stronger than ordinary people in certain aspects. They would be able to wield a relative abundance of Beyonder powers. Phew! Klein slowly exhaled, returned to his bedroom, and summoned himself to bring the Beyonder ingredients into the real world. He didn't prepare any additional vessels. He washed an iron pot in the kitchen a few times, and began to concoct the potion, according to the steps of handling the supplementary ingredients before handling the main ingredients. With the clown's ability at controlling his body, he quickly finished the first stage, and one by one, he put in the dark pattern Black Panther's spinal fluid and the mist treant's true root. Sizzle! With a jarring sound, a pale white fog suddenly rose, and was forcefully pulled back into the pot by an invisible force. When everything calmed down, Klein quickly poured every drop of liquid into a transparent bottle that he had prepared. That liquid was rather special. It was as if fireworks were constantly being released from within it. Red, orange, yellow, green, and other colors constantly scattered, disappeared, and then reappeared again. This was the magician potion. Klein stuck a coin worth 1 pound between his thumb and index finger of his left hand, flicked it up, and opened his palm to catch it. He was using divination to confirm if the potion he concocted had succeeded. Pa! The gold coin fell. Its portrait faced up, indicating a positive response. Without any hesitation, Klein put away the gold coin, picked up the potion, and walked out of the kitchen. At that moment, the sky was already dark. The gas lamps in the room hadn't been lit up yet, causing the surroundings to be in complete darkness. Only the light near the oriel window created a gloomy scene. Klein sat down on the sofa and began cogitation to calm his stirring heart and dispel all of his emotions temporarily from his body. After doing all of this, he raised the glass bottle, tipped his head, and drank the magician potion. Gulp! Gulp! The ice-cold potion went down his throat, and at every moment, it felt like countless bubbles were bursting. Klein's entire body was experiencing this stimulation, and massive amounts of information flooded his mind, blooming into fireworks. The veins on his forehead bulged, and his head felt like it was about to burst. However, this wasn't a very difficult situation for Klein to endure. The terrifying ravings before entering the gray fog, and the evil roars of the true creator, were much more terrifying. Hornacis! Phlegria! Hornacis! Phlegria! Hornacis! Phlegria! The ethereal temptation echoed again. Klein's head expanded and contracted repeatedly before he gradually recovered his thoughts. He began to consciously restrain his thoughts, outline the spherical light, and slowly enter a state of cogitation. After an unknown period of time, his vision recovered. At the same time, he felt an itch all over his body, with his arms feeling the worst. Klein rolled up his sleeves and was surprised to see that one of his arms was deeply wrinkled, like a centenarian. The other arm had lost its color and had become translucent. He could directly see his blood vessels, muscles, and veins. Could it be that I had nearly lost control? No, it shouldn't be. This should be the remnant influences. Klein sat on the sofa in the dark, leaning forward as he watched the anomaly in his arms warily, as if it were a breeding ground for monsters. And all of this had nothing to do with Klein. He sat quietly on the sofa in the darkness, watching his creased skin and the translucent state of his arms slowly recover. 5 to 6 minutes later, Klein silently sighed as everything finally returned to normal. It's a good thing that no one came knocking on the door or ringing on the bell. I only chose to advance after completely digesting the Sequence 8 potion. With such severe effects, it would be hard for those Beyonders who depended on time to grind through the potion. It really is difficult to pass this stage. No wonder Captain took 9 years. No wonder Swain, the former captain of a mandated Punisher squad and owner of the Evil Dragon Bar, didn't dare to consume the Sequence 7 potion, Seafarer. After sitting silently for more than 10 seconds, Klein slowly stood up. At that moment, he was already a mid-sequence Beyonder. At that moment, he was already a magician. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.